Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. Just getting that straight. I hope you guys are doing all right this morning. We are on a Thursday. Today is March the 6th. I want to give a shout out to my uncle. It is his birthday today, Lloyd Thomas. I love all my uncles. So there's that. I'm not going to, parse. Great guy, great uncle. Happy birthday. He is probably closest with my mom. Her birthday is in 2 days on the 8th. So in 2 days, Diane Thomas, but that's going to be on Saturday. So you guys aren't going to be able to embarrass her with happy birthdays. But shout out to my uncle. Happy birthday. I hope you guys are doing all right. We have a fantastic show for you today. Scott Ritter is going to be here at 7:30. There's a lot of news on the military front. I guess the big news is that it is confirmed that Donald Trump has cut off weapons, or at the very least, they say pause. But in addition to cutting off weapons, he's also cut off intelligence. This is according to Politico, that intelligence sharing, including from the HIMARS, has been stopped. No more. The CIA also confirmed that they are no longer sharing intelligence with Ukraine. So Trump is clearly putting the screws to Zelensky. I want to give a shout out to my chat. What's going on, chat? Car Care. Is that Car Care? Yeah, Car Care. Shout out to you. Marshall, shout out to you. Lilo the dog. Vincent Lloyd. Jino Choi. Skeptical Jerk. Bruce Hannaford. Diane Thomas. Shout out to all of you. As I always point out, you guys could be anywhere, and you just so happen to end up here. And I always am amazed by that because, hard politics at 7 in the morning is not necessarily the easiest thing in the world to digest. And yet we are here to digest it. Thank you for joining me. So Politico is reporting that, and Trump is in talks with rivals of Zelensky. Trump is in talk with rivals of Zelensky. So, as the senior members of the Donald Trump administration have engaged in back-channel communication with political rivals of Ukrainian leader Vladimir Zelensky. This is according to Politico. Zelensky, who term expired, is running under this notion of martial law, but apparently undisclosed conversations with Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko and former President Poroshenko have revolved around restarting elections, according to 3 Ukrainian MPs and Republican foreign policy experts who spoke anonymously to Politico. What's interesting about this, too, if you remember, Poroshenko pointed out that elections will be held, I think he said in October, and people were like, okay, well, why do you think that? Why do you know that? Why are you saying that? Well, if he's having back-channel communications with Donald Trump and his team, maybe there's communications around that. Now, Trump has called Zelensky a dictator. He has effectively said that he has a 4% approval rating, and if he ran in an election, he would lose to a hot potato, maybe even a cold potato. Point is, he would lose. Now, 4% is a bit aggressive, but Trump has a tendency to, be hyperbolic. And in this tendency to be hyperbolic, 4% was the number that he effectively came up with. He is not wrong, though, that Zelensky is a dictator. When you get rid of opposition political parties, when you get rid of opposition news organizations, when you get rid of effectively anything that would give an alternate point of view to the Banderite fascist regime that you've enacted, okay, then yeah, I'm going to call you a dictator. When you go further and say, we're no longer going to have elections, then yes, I am going to call you a dictator. It is a hallmark of dictators to not have elections, right? So Trump isn't wrong in saying that. The freak out that came from Democrats, calm down. You guys supported and gave hundreds of billions of dollars to a losing war. Calm down. Calm down. Pocahontas looking at you. While I have a moment, I wanted to hit the story yesterday and didn't get the opportunity. Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is living in a fantasy land. He is living in an unreality. And Trump derangement syndrome has effectively broken his brain. It is weird. It is strange. Sanders has become a degenerate warmonger who has been throwing out these tropes that are just fundamentally untrue. And I would have to think that he knows better and he's doing this entirely for Trump. But I could be entirely wrong, and he could just be a degenerate troglodyte warmonger, just like every other warmonger that doesn't necessarily want hundreds of thousands of people to stop dying, to stop being killed. Sanders came out after Trump's speech and said this, but I also want to piggyback this on what is on his Twitter page. This is Bernie going after Trump. And notice he points out this notion of the big lie. And I want to point out that Democrats and Sanders himself have been running with the big lie being unprovoked war of aggression. It is a lie built in the bricks, meaning in the framing of the language. It's a lie. This is Sanders pushing the big lie.
As you heard tonight, President Trump has been very effective in creating what I would call a parallel universe for his supporters. A set of ideas that either have no basis in reality or in the great scheme of things are nowhere near the most important concerns of the American people. Zelensky is leading a country trying to defend democracy against an authority.
Needs to resign in order for there to be a peace deal.
I think that is a horrific suggestion. Zelensky is leading a country trying to defend democracy against an authoritarian dictator, Putin, who invaded his country. And I think millions of Americans are embarrassed, are ashamed that you have a president of the United States who says that Ukraine started the war, that Zelensky is a dictator. He's got it exactly backwards.
Sanders is lying through his teeth. Sanders is lying through his teeth. Everything that Sanders just said there was a lie. For one, Trump never said that Ukraine started the war. What he said was, you guys had 3 years to effectively put this to bed, and you didn't do it. That was what he said. They've interpreted that as Trump is saying Zelensky started the war. 2, Zelensky is a dictator. Full stop. I just pointed that out. You've gotten rid of elections. You've gotten rid of opposition political parties. You've gotten rid of opposition media. What do you call that? Dictatorship. There's no political movement in Ukraine short of Zelensky's firm fist and maintaining control of that country and preventing any opposition from bubbling up or running against them. In fact, I'll go further. If you remember, Zelensky was threatening Zelensky, his main political opponent, who he sent into exile into the UK, with prosecution if indeed Zelensky ran or put up a political fight against Zelensky. How are you saying that this man is not a dictator in regards to the country? Where are the elections? Where are the opposition political parties? Where are the opposition media? Sanders, of course, is not going to want to deal with that because he wants to go after Trump. The other thing, defending democracy, Ukraine is not a democracy. In 2014, the government was overthrown by the U.S. government. They called it a revolution of dignity. By every stretch of the imagination, by every language, by every definition, it was literally a coup. The United States, working with a band of Nazis, overthrew that government and installed the government that they wanted. The conversation between Pyatt and Victoria Nuland, where they effectively say, we're going to midwife this thing, fuck the EU, and determine who they were going to put into power. And just so happened those people ended up in power. This is the big lie. This is the big lie. As Sanders likes to call it, the big lie. And Sanders is pushing this lie. To make this point even clear, Americans are embarrassed, Are they? Are Americans embarrassed? When you're looking at the polling on this, right here, Joe Biden's policy was negative 22 on Ukraine. Right here. Don't take my word for it. Take Trump loving CNN. Take their word for it.
Well, I think the easiest way we can kind of just ask this is, do Americans like the way that Trump's handling his job and compare it to how they felt about Joe Biden? So this is the net approval rating. You look at Joe Biden back in 2024, he was 22 points underwater. Holy cow. You look at Donald Trump, it's just a different planet entirely. I mean, the gulf between these two is wider than the Gulf of America or Mexico.
Between how America views what Joe Biden was doing versus the Gulf and what Trump is doing on Ukraine is wider than the Gulf of Mexico. That is what he said. That is what he said. So what is Sanders talking about? I'm pointing out Sanders is lying through his teeth in everything he's saying on this issue. And my question is, does Sanders know he's lying? Let's go further into this. Right here. Here's another one. Most Americans favor a quick end to the Ukraine war. Most Americans. Let's go to another one. Half of Ukrainians want a quick negotiated end to the war. And by the way, even if that means giving up territory, more than 50% of Ukrainians want to end the war, even if it means ceding territory to end the war. That's how bad the war is. What is Sanders talking about? I'm trying to point out that Sanders is lying through his teeth. This jingoism that Sanders is effectively throwing out. We're going to fight to the last dead Ukrainian, even if we need to drag kids into the war. And Sanders is like, yes, send in your babies. We're going to fight to the last dead Ukrainian. Sanders is out of his mind. Either he is looking for anything to throw at Trump, in which case he lands on this and decides to lie flagrantly, constantly lie about it in order to keep the war going. Or he is that incompetent and he doesn't know any better. You choose. I don't know which one it is. In previous cases, Sanders had a pretty good take on history where he could explain things that were taking place in South America and other parts of the globe. Maybe he is just radically incompetent on this issue. Or maybe he's lumping in with Democrats in order to go after Donald Trump. I don't know which. This is a disgusting issue to do it on. Hundreds of thousands of people have lost their lives for no reason. At the very least, not a good one. The United States has been agitating in Ukraine for decades. We offered NATO membership in 2008, despite the fact that Ukraine was supposed to be an independent country. We blew off the Minsk agreements, 1 and 2. Don't take my word for it. Take Hollande's word for it. Take Angela Merkel's word for it. We blew it off. We told them, you don't have to attend to it. You don't have to care about it. And the Istanbul agreements, where they were going to come to an end to the war within the first month of that war, the U.S., Boris Johnson, you're not going to get security guarantees from us to keep fighting. Does Bernie the warmonger know that? Does Bernie the warmonger know that? Because what this looks like is an old man who's become far more irrelevant in the political space, who had his opportunity to shine at one point, failed in that opportunity to win an election, got cheated by the political party that he is effectively lumping in with right now. It's sad. It's pathetic. It's humiliating. And he is out of touch with reality and, more importantly, for one of the very few times, out of touch with the American public. Because the American public says, in this war now. They back Trump to do so. And again, 22 points negative for Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders' position on this issue. Plus 2 points for Trump on this issue. That is a 24-point difference between what Bernie Sanders wants, between what Kamala Harris wants, between what Joe Biden wants, and what Donald Trump is doing. Out of touch with reality. That's what Bernie Sanders is. And this notion of Trump creating an alternate reality, you are too. You are too. You're lying en masse to the American public in order to create an opposition to Trump, as if you couldn't come up with an opposition to Trump on other issues that he is effectively doing domestically, which the American public is not for. But this is the issue you lump into. This is the issue you lump into. Bernie the warmonger. Bernie the warmonger. Humiliating. Just humiliating. Do better, Sanders. Do better, Sanders. You can go after Trump. No issue with it. I'm trying to point out, morally, ethically, this is not the issue to go after him on, considering he's ending a war. And it is normally a lefty thing to want to prevent or end wars. And for whatever reason, the main lefty in Congress, Sanders, doesn't want to end it. Just outrageous. Out-effing rageous. I want to bring in my guest, though. We are joined with the man, the legend, Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector, whistleblower. Scott Ritter. How you doing, Scott? You doing okay, man?
I'm doing great. Yourself?
I'm doing good. I'm better that you are here. In fact, give me one moment to adjust the audio. I want to get this right. There we are. Scott, there's reporting that's come out, I think it was either this morning or yesterday, that Trump has suspended intelligence. The CIA has confirmed they're no longer giving intelligence. HIMARS information is no longer being distributed to Ukraine also. And apparently Donald Trump is in talks with opposition. I want to go with the first one first, though. What is the significance of withholding intelligence from Ukraine in addition to the military aid that we're no longer giving to them?
Well, one of the Russians have always said, look, we're willing to talk with the United States at any time. Diplomacy is always an answer, but it's difficult to talk with somebody who's actively trying to strategically defeat you, especially if you're going to be talking about stability and such. The fact of the matter is the United States is in a proxy war with Russia using Ukraine as the proxy. I was put on several Ukrainian death lists for saying that back in the day. I've said it from day one. But it was the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who said it yesterday. He said, no, we're in a proxy war against Russia and it has to stop. And that's just the case. You can't have constructive dialogue with a nation when you're at war with it. That's just the reality. So one of the things that constitutes our being in an active state of conflict with Russia is that we are actively participating in the targeting of Russia by Ukraine. And we do that not only by the provision of weapons, but by these weapons, as Vladimir Putin has said several times, these weapons don't do what they're supposed to do without American intelligence. The targeting data, not just where to hit, but how to hit, the digital information that makes the weapon go where it goes. This is all a product of U.S. intelligence. And the United States is trying to set the table properly for successful negotiations. And the first step of that is to tell the Russians, we aren't your enemy anymore. I mean, Sergei Lavrov came out and said, the United States is not our friend right now. We don't have friendly relations with the United States. We're working on establishing normal diplomatic contact, but it's easier to do that with somebody that you're not in war with. And so that's what's happening. This goes hand in glove with the instructions given by Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, to cease offensive cyber warfare activities against Russia, which we were doing. So what we're doing is sending a signal to the Russians that we no longer view you as an enemy, as an adversary that we're seeking to strategically destroy, to defeat. We view you as a nation we wish to live in peace and harmony with. And we need to get this war over, and we're trying to create the conditions so that the Russians can trust us as counterparts, as colleagues in this joint effort. You can't talk about walking side by side with somebody while you're stabbing them in the back, And this is an essential step for the United States to create it's a confidence building measure that tells the Russians that we are serious about peace.
No, I do get that. I guess what I'm asking is, what is the significance on the military, on the battlefield? Like, Russia is still moving. They're still taking territory. They're still on the battlefield, still advancing. So yeah. So, like, what does it mean for the Ukrainian military to no longer get U.S. intelligence, or for that matter, to no longer get military aid? How long can they even last without these things being in place?
Well, let's be honest here. The number of HIMARS systems and ATACMS, these are the two systems that are primarily, detrimentally impacted by this. There's not that many of them. They were never in sufficient quantities to have a meaningful impact on the battlefield. This is a very, very large battlefield, an extremely large battlefield. And on the occasions when HIMARS were used, yes, you had a momentary tactical advantage for the Ukrainians where they were able to fire, HIMARS with cluster munitions that killed, 34 Russians. Yay, good job, Ukraine. And then the Russians kept advancing because it's war and you lose people in war. And killing 34 Russians or killing 56 Russians or killing 16 Russians at a time, it's bad for the families of those dead Russians. There's no doubt about that. But it doesn't change the trajectory of this conflict. This is a war being fought on a scope and scale that many Americans can't possibly imagine. And, for every HIMARS attack, there's a Russian, guided bomb attack, or their own multiple launch rocket systems, or their artillery that's killing thousands of Ukrainians. The death exchange is not equal between the two parties, and Russia continues to do it. So this is more of a psychological thing for the Ukrainians than actually, the death knell. Don't expect the Ukrainian military to fold overnight because they've lost the only thing that allows them to resist. The most effective weapon that the Ukrainians have is the drone. And, these drones are made by the Ukrainians using tactics developed by the Ukrainians. So they don't lose that. Their long-range drone strike capability is impacted because the intelligence that was used to not necessarily find the target. Anybody can find the target. It's how you get to the target, the path you take. You have to weave your way through Russian air defense systems that are constantly moving. And so the U.S. was providing real-time intelligence to the Ukrainians that enabled these drones to penetrate Russian air defense and strike these, these oil refineries deep inside Russia. That is not going to be happening. The queuing that the Ukrainians would get with their air defense, for instance, the Patriot, in an ideal situation, the Patriot's pinging 24/7 with its radar, so that when you fire something, the radar picks it up and you get the maximum efficient intercept, solution. But the problem is, if you're pinging with your radar, then the anti-radiation weapons that the Russians have come flying in and blow up the radar, and that's it. So what's happened is there's an arrangement made, not just with the Patriot, but with all air defense, where the air defense is in dormant status. And then the United States superimposes with its intelligence the ability to detect Russian launches and provide early warning about the location of the launch, the direction that the weapon's coming in, so that the Ukrainians can vector their air defense, prepare, and as the weapon enters intercept, umbrella or a window of opportunity for intercept, they can throw out their radar, grab the weapon, the weapon, fire the missiles, and then shut down the radar, and then move the radar so that the Russians can't destroy the radar. That doesn't happen now because we've taken away that intelligence. And that means that either the Ukrainian air defense are going to stay in dormant status and not have any chance whatsoever, or they're going to have to become more aggressive with the use of their own radars, which opens up a window of vulnerability for their destruction. So it's a bad thing for Ukrainian air defense. And the same thing holds with their Air Force. The whole F-16 program is predicated on the F-16s getting guidance and direction from the United States, equivalent to, for instance, when our aircraft go up in the air, we have an AWACS aircraft, airborne warning and control aircraft, that big airplane with the big dome on top that's spinning around, and it's collecting all the intelligence and shooting that to the fighters so they have total battlefield awareness of what the enemy's doing. But if you shut down that AWACS, the plane goes blind, and it's a much more difficult fight. For the Ukrainians, for them getting up, they have the equivalent of AWACS with the American intelligence that's in consolidated, and there's communication and all that. That's done. So now the F-16s that the Ukrainians have are going to be flying blind when they take off. Not a good situation. So overall, this is not a good thing for the Ukrainians. The U.S. provided weaponry that whose effective use is contingent upon the provision of this intelligence data. Those weapons aren't going to perform as desired.
Well, they also froze the weapons. So it's not just the intelligence. They also froze weapons.
They froze the shipment of the weapons. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, Ukraine still has a significant stockpile of weapons. But this is problematic for many things. For instance, any weapon system, when you use it, requires maintenance.
Right.
And that maintenance requires a combination of technical skill on the part of the maintainers and a stockpile of spare parts. And what you're going to see is that in those areas where the United States was providing the technical skill, that's not being provided anymore. And the stockpile of spare parts burns out very quick. And if there's nothing to replace, then what happens is all these weapons basically just ground down, become unusable, get withdrawn from the battlefield, and then you lose. So all the M1 tanks that we've provided, all the Bradley fighting vehicles, all the Strikers, all the howitzers, the HIMARS, anything that we've provided that requires maintenance. And the U.S. military uses very advanced equipment, sophisticated equipment that requires constant maintenance. To give you an example, the Striker infantry fighting vehicle, it's a wheeled vehicle, and the suspension system that it has is it's a not hydraulic but pneumatic thing, but it's constantly going up and down based upon the terrain. It has to be maintained. I mean, it's a nightmare for American soldiers in garrison, because if you don't maintain it properly, the wheels don't get the clearance, and then they puncture, and the thing doesn't work. And it's just, for American soldiers, it's just a nightmare. The Ukrainians now are responsible for that, and they have their manuals. But if you don't get those spare parts, if you don't get, and I'm talking about, there's that old saying, for the one of a nail, the horseshoe came off, then the horse wasn't available, so the rider didn't come in, the cavalry charge didn't happen, and we lost the war. So the one of a little gadget is going to prevent the Striker from being maintained. So the Strikers pull from the battlefield, and when you pull all 94 of them or 130 of them from the battlefield, because none of them work anymore, now you're talking about a significant depletion of capability. So this is a big deal. We're basically shutting down the Ukrainian war machine, and within a period of 2 weeks, 3 weeks, the Ukrainians won't be able to continue fighting this war. But this is more than just about HIMARS and ATACMS. This is about the whole big picture.
Yeah, and I guess I don't think I've had you on ever since Zelensky's meeting with Donald Trump. Give me a take on that before I move to another issue. I just want to get a few moments of your perspective of Zelensky having what I call a bitch fit in the Oval Office, and Donald Trump effectively giving him an intervention, him and Vance. What are your thoughts on that? And keep in mind, all of this that's taking place now in regards to cutting support, cutting intelligence, is a direct result from that meeting. Give me your thoughts on that meeting.
Well, see, I don't think that meeting occurred in isolation. There's many people who are like, oh my God, that meeting was supposed to go so well, and then it blew up, and oh geez. I think this was an ambush, straight up ambush. Everything that happened.
Do you? But they were like, they spent most of that meeting with no issue. And Zelensky seemingly was chomping at the bit to relitigate that contract. But why do you think it was an ambush? Why do you think it was an ambush?
Because the president of the United States doesn't walk into any meeting like that unprepared. Let me just set this up.
Yeah.
When the President of the United States goes to the General Assembly of the United Nations to make his speech and then sit around New York for a couple days to meet with world leaders and all this, the National Security Agency and the CIA support this by intercepting every communication, every conversation, everything that happens in New York leading up to that, so that when the president sits down with the world leader, he knows exactly what's the agenda of the world leader. Exactly. The president is in 100% control of the meeting. The meeting doesn't happen unless the president's in control. And the president's in control by knowing everything you are thinking, planning, etc., and having a counter to that. That's why we don't lose. It's not fair. It's not right. But we don't lose because we are better prepared. Because when we walk into a meeting, we are 100% in control of that meeting.
Right.
Zelensky, who campaigned actively against the president when he was candidate Trump, Zelensky, who conspired with Europe and NATO to undermine the policies of this president, Zelensky, who badmouthed the president and his policies, who lied to the president of the United States, now has a meeting with the president of the United States, and you think the president's going to go in and just say, let's just wing it. That doesn't happen. Okay, we have an agenda. Zelensky doesn't have an agenda. That's what you need to understand when you meet with the president of the United States. We have an agenda. You don't. Now, there's nations that have stature that both sides have an agenda, and there's mutual respect. I'd say when he meets with Vladimir Putin, we're not in control of that meeting. We're in control to the extent we can be. We're collecting all that intelligence on Putin, but he's collecting it all on us too, and both sides are well prepared. And there's also agreement beforehand what the agenda is, so there are no surprises. So the meeting is a carefully orchestrated, choreographed gathering. That's okay. That's one way to do this. But we're not partners with Zelensky. He's the enemy. That's what you need to understand. When Zelensky came into the White House, he was the enemy of the United States, the enemy of this president. And we knew it. This is a man who doesn't want peace. This is a man who's actively conspiring with other enemies of the United States named Macron and Starmer to undermine the policies of the United States, policies which the president believes are existential in nature, because we're trying to stop a world war with Russia. And anybody who's in the way of that is actually trying to foment a world war, therefore destroy us. This is part of a broader strategy that Trump had put out there, because nothing happens in a vacuum. Zelensky isn't isolated. It's about Zelensky Europe, Zelensky NATO. It's about the whole relationship the United States has with the collective West that we've been working with to use Ukraine as a proxy against Russia. And again, as I said, Marco Rubio now has admitted we are at a proxy war with Russia, and that people on our side are in this war as well, Europe, etc. We want this war to end. They don't. So we began this process by sending Pete Hegseth to NATO and by sending J.D. Vance to Munich. And they went in there, and I've written about this. I view this as, diplomatic maneuver warfare. This is ideological warfare, intellectual warfare, whatever you want to call it. But the key to this is get inside your opponent's decision-making cycle. You don't want to walk into an ambush. Pete Hegseth doesn't want to come into NATO and go, well, I'm just going to sit down and listen to what NATO has to say. Because what happens is NATO acts, now you're reacting. And now the OODA loop is against you. The tightening of the circle ends up with you being shot down by NATO. No, you come into NATO, sweep the table clean, and throw something out there, and NATO's going, oh, God, we didn't understand it well. And now they're reacting to you. And then you just leave them and walk away in chaos. J.D. Vance goes into Munich, not to sit there and hold hands and sing Kumbaya and, oh, we love you, come together for the group hug.
No, he put the hammer down. Yeah.
Clean up yours. We're done. You suck. We're finished. I don't want to talk about this. I want to talk about your lack of democratic values. You guys suck. You're the worst. And then he left. And they're like, oh, God, God, we don't know what to do. And okay, now Zelensky's playing stupid games. And so now Zelensky says, yes to the mineral deal, no to the mineral deal. We send the Secretary of Treasury in. He embarrasses the Secretary of Treasury. You think he's a friend? You think we're going to let him come into the White House and set the agenda. We gathered every piece of intelligence about Zelensky. We know every time he snorts cocaine, every time he passes gas, you name it, we know it. We knew he was. Think of the psychological warfare. This is a man who said right from the start, I will never wear a suit so long as Ukraine is at war, because this is a symbol of our national virility. I am a warrior leader. I am the new Churchill. I am wearing this. I will never lose it. We came and said, hey, you got to wear a suit. Imagine the psychological warfare there. What do you mean I got to wear a suit? I'm the great warrior. I have to wear green. Got to wear a suit. Well, I'm not going to wear a suit. You just set yourself up, because now what happened is, again, do you think that White House poll reporter just out of the blue said,
No.
don't you wear a suit?
That guy was a plant.
Bingo. Well, now you understand. That guy was there, and he was going to ask that question if Zelensky didn't wear a suit.
Yeah.
It was set up. The whole thing was set up. Everything. They said they set up the room in the back. They knew Zelensky couldn't sign the deal because Zelensky had already signed the deal with the British.
With the
and the
Brits.
British and Zelensky were in a panic on how do they get her through this, because they betrayed America, signed the deal, and now America's saying you got to sign a deal with us. And Zelensky said, I can't do two things at once. What do I do? And so he's sitting there, and Trump is just sitting there bringing it on. Hey, we're just going to have this little conversation. Don't worry. Then we're going to go into the back room. And Zelensky, I don't want to go in the back room. I don't want to go in the back room. I don't want to go in the back room. And they're blah, 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 blah. And then they set this whole thing up. Zelensky said what he said. Trump brings down the hammer. And then, again, the vice president of the United States' role is never to steal the spotlight from the president. The vice president will never voluntarily interject himself in a way that makes the president look weak or inefficient. So for the vice president to speak in that form with cameras to the world, he was told what to say, when to say it. And Donald Trump, like the good WWF fan that he is, just tagged JD Vance, who came in and backed the hammer down. And it was all over for Zelensky, finished, because they know his mind. They've played him, and he was just played like a fine-tooth fiddle. The United States is in control of this. Everything that's happening is because we want it to happen. It looks ugly because chaos is ugly. But remember, we don't want Europe to be the ones calling the shots.
Right.
There's an emergency meeting right now in Europe taking place today that just exposes them as the weak, useless, effeminate losers that they are collectively. That meeting, why is it happening? Because Europe decided that they were going to stand up and be strong. It's happening because they're reacting to us. We set the agenda there. The United States did by everything we did. Europe's doing exactly what we want them to do. And we know what the outcome will be because we collect intelligence on every single one of those pathetic losers. They're so loser. They can't actually go through a day without calling each other. I mean, imagine how easy this is. If I'm a collector, I mean, normally I'm like, okay, is he going to use a burner phone?
It's like, what is this guy thinking in the moment?
Yeah. Scan. Where is he? We got something. Get him in there. Factor it in. Get it. Oh, crap. We only got the end of the conversation. We don't know what's going on. No, these guys make it easy. Oh, hello, Emmanuel Macron. Yes, how you doing? Yes. Those Americans, those dirty Americans, we're going to get them. We're going to conspire. I'm going to call Keir Starmer. I'm going to tell him he must do this. And I'm just sitting there going, you guys are making this too easy. Send a fax. Yeah, send a fax. I mean, the point is, we're collecting everything. You do know that Europe is one giant American listening center. That the National Security Agency and the CIA have Europe wired like you wouldn't believe. We were listening to the private phone calls of Angela Merkel. We got caught out, but we were listening to them. Who else did we listen to? Everybody. Yeah. Nobody speaks. And we have entire thousands of analysts right now in Fort Meade, Maryland, whose job in the morning is to get up and tell us what's for breakfast for everybody or whatever, because we're listening to everything. They write up little statements on what the mindset of these people are. That goes up to decision makers who consolidate it, and it gets briefed to the president and briefed to every other decision maker. We don't sit down in a meeting and not know exactly what's going on. Now, if the Europeans were clever, they could do deception. They could do a deception plan, but so that requires them to be in control of the momentum. Now, if you're on the winning side of the OODA loop, where you've acted and we're reacting, that gives you time to go, All right, now what's our next plan? We're going to do this, that, and the other thing. Okay, hey, let's implement the deception plan Alpha 1203. All right. Oh, poor Americans. We've just implemented the deception plan Alpha 1203. You're going to be reacting to that. Hey, Bravo 2 Charlie, bring that one in. We got the whole plan. We're ready because we're in charge. We're the ones making it happen. That's not the Europeans right now. They're the ones getting hammered by our plan. Everything they do is a reaction to what we have done. And that's so the White House meeting was 100% set up. It couldn't be any other way.
Interesting. So one of the other things that came on the marquee, Donald Trump is apparently in talks with allies, or let's say opponents of Zelensky. I'm fascinated by this one. I assume this was going to take place at some point. But he's apparently in talks with Timoshenko was one, Poroshenko was another one. And I want to piggyback this on the notion that Poroshenko came out, I believe this was a few weeks ago, and said that there are going to be elections in Ukraine. I think he said in October or something to that effect. I mean, this is obvious, right? If Zelensky, he is clearly an impediment. You called him an enemy. I agree with you on this. He is an impediment to peace. He doesn't necessarily want to go anywhere. He doesn't want to have elections, despite, and behind the scenes, there were elements of Trump team that says Zelensky should go to France and enjoy his wealth, leave. What's your take on this? From your point of view, are they going to be able to push him into elections?
Yes, we're in charge. He's not.
Yeah.
I just want to make that point again. We're in charge. He's not. Now, we don't get to go in and dictate solutions, but
Right.
what we do is we manipulate processes to get to where we want to get. Let me put it this way: there will be elections in Ukraine. That's a prerequisite for conflict termination. Now, it's interesting. Let's just break this down a little bit. Who the Trump people are talking to? Poroshenko. Yes, his name isn't Zelensky, but he's the one that
Yes.
lied about Minsk.
Yes.
So guess who will not be the president of Ukraine? Poroshenko. Timoshenko, same thing. She's a nationalist, right sector kind of person. She won't be president. But all the Russians want is for the United States to create the inevitability of elections. And then what's going to happen, this is my prediction, is that we're going to tag the Russians in at the appropriate time, and there will be elections. And their man, Medvedchuk, will win. And now they'll have the Russian-controlled president who will redo the Constitution and do all the changes that have to happen if denazification, demilitarization are going to take place, which are two Russian preconditions. See, we can't come in up front and say, this is the outcome. What we can say is there has to be presidential elections. And now we pretend that these people are going to be players. Hey, what do you think about elections? That's cool. How about you? Yeah, you guys, hey, why don't you work with us on this whole election thing? And now everybody goes, there's going to be elections. Good. You're not in, he's in. And now we have an outcome. That's, I think, the direction we're heading here. This is just setting the table.
Well, I was just going to say, from your take, from my understanding, opposition parties have been completely banned. And so the only people that would even be up potentially for an election are effectively these lunatics. As you pointed out, these people are on the far right. How's it going to work? I mean, I would imagine, explain that to me. Explain in your mind, how do you think that's going to work? Are they going to allow, let's say, opposition parties in, opposition media back in? At some point, those things are going to have to be allowed. Otherwise, you're just going to get another lunatic coming into play. Zelensky, for example, again, a nationalist. All of these people are effectively part of the Banderite fascist collection.
They're not going to be part of the future of Ukraine.
Yeah,
but you need them right now to construct the edifice of elections. You need to make elections, the process of an election, inevitable. And once that happens, then you basically say, yes, but thank you for the elections. But now we open up the rule book None of you right-wing fanatic Banderas are allowed to participate because you lost the war. You see,
Right.
Russia won the war, and Russia gets to dictate the outcomes. And Russia has said that you guys are all being purged. So kindly go over to the purging area, and Russia will bring in the genuine opposition, the ones that had to flee the country for their lives. The guy who's probably going to be president of Ukraine in a post-conflict environment is a Ukrainian politician who was arrested and beaten up and tortured.
Yep.
And the Russians thought so highly of this man that they exchanged Azov Nazis that they captured in Mariupol, who should have been executed for their crimes. They exchanged them for this man. This man is now in Russia being briefed. And I think you're going to see that when there are elections, this man's going to be brought in, and the elections are going to be, stacked so that, he is the candidate. Russia's not looking for a democratic outcome yet. Russia's looking for an outcome that allows democracy to be built in the future, democracy that doesn't include Banderists, right sector, and these horrible people of that have allowed ultra nationalism to infect all of Ukraine.
Can we talk about Macron for a moment?
Sure.
What a loser! He is so out of touch with reality. So Macron recently gave the speech to France, apparently, as if there's some significance of France. And he pointed out right here, Macron is lying here. He's lying through his teeth. But I do want to get your take on it. I think this is in French.
And I welcome them.
Unfortunately, this is French, but
We
the
need to
commentary is
continue
below.
to
But
help
he points
Ukraine
out effectively
Ukrainians
that
to
the
resist.
Minsk agreements, that
Even
Putin can't be trusted because Putin apparently blew off the Minsk agreements. That is mind-blowing for a French leader to say that. Give me your take on that. Because even Sanders and many other people in the US come up with this construction that, well, Putin can't be trusted because he blew off agreements and he went in against all of these Minsk 1 and 2 agreements. Go into that for me. Explain that. I've pointed out on my show before, but you probably can give a better explanation than I can.
Well, first of all, Putin's the only one that wanted apparently Minsk to work.
Yes.
It wasn't Putin that backed away. We know that Macron's predecessor, Francois Hollande, the president of France, has admitted that Minsk was a sham, that it was never meant, that the West, France, Germany, and Ukraine, never intended Minsk to be implemented, that it was always designed as a vehicle to buy time so that NATO could build up a Ukrainian army capable of recapturing the Donbass. And it was this rebuilt American, gave us time to arm ourselves. I mean, good Lord. It's straight there. I mean, there's no debating here. This isn't a matter of, interpretation. They've just straight up and said, no, Minsk was just there to buy time. The Ukrainian army was surrounded by the Russians in a village, I'll butcher it, begins with a D, Debaltseve or something of that nature. They were surrounded. It was a smaller army at the time. And the Russians you could have gone in and killed several thousand of them and ended the Ukrainian military right there. And the Ukrainians turned to the French and the Germans and said, please intervene, get Putin to not pull the trigger. And so they went and they said, come on, man, let's be about peace. Putin's like, these guys started the fight and they were raping these Russians and murdering these Russians. And they, these are the same people that kicked 40 some odd Russians out of a burning building and killed them. And they're not good people. We sort of like to finish the job here. They're like, no, give peace a chance. All we are saying is give peace a chance. And Putin went, yeah, nice song. Okay. I'll do this. I'll give peace a chance. And so he did it. And then for the next 8 years, Putin kept going, what about that peace thing? What about that peace thing? Peace, give peace a chance. All we are saying, kumbaya. And we'll do that. It's complicated. You're not actually playing right. No, we're playing fair. The rules are constitutional changes. We respect borders. No, we got it. We were there when it was written. We understand what's supposed to happen here. You guys are delaying it. Why? Well, don't worry. Don't ignore those NATO training bases over there. Oh gosh, that U.S. Army briefing that said they're training a battalion of Ukrainian forces, NATO standard, every 55 days so they can go from here to here to fight Russians. Forget about that. What the briefing officer meant to say is we're training the Ukrainian army in how to use to turn their swords into plowshares. They're not really training to fight you. They're farmers. Farmers. That's what they're doing. They're farmers. And Putin's like, well, they don't look like farmers to me, but okay, I'll trust you on this one. In June of 2021, he met with Biden in Switzerland, in Geneva, where what he kept saying is, yeah, he kept saying, all these battalions you see us moving on Russian soil that you're so concerned about, we won't need to move them if you stop training those Ukrainian soldiers to invade the Donbass. What we need you to do is implement Minsk. And Biden went, number one thing, I'm going to give instructions to Tony Blinken right now. And we're going to make implementing Minsk the thing. And Russia's like, cool, then we're done. That's all we need. All we're saying, make it happen. And, Blinken, instead of trying to get Minsk in, started almost immediately setting up the conditions to secretly arm the Ukrainians, to flow in the Stingers and the Javelins. He started that in September. And the Russians are sitting there negotiating with the French and the Germans going, hey, you get that call from Tony yet? Tony said he's going to call you. Get that call yet? No, we're still. And the Russians are going, well, wait a minute. Tony's over here giving weapons to the Ukrainians. What's going on here? And in October, they confronted the Germans and the French about that. They said, okay, we see what's happening here. Last chance. Do you or do you not want to implement Minsk? Straight up. And the French and the Germans said, no. So Macron's a lying sack of crap, because now this isn't Francois Hollande saying, we're right. This is Macron straight up saying, I, Macron, do not want to implement Minsk.
Yeah.
Macron's a liar. And the Russians went, good. But, because the Russians don't want war, they went, well, without Minsk, we don't have a framework to work upon here. We need a new framework. So they wrote a draft treaty. And they gave one to NATO and they gave one to the United States, said, new European security framework. We don't want war. What we want is an agreement that you guys will keep. So here it is, a treaty. We understand you might have problems here. Let's talk about it. Let's sit down and have real meaningful discussions. But it can't drag out forever, because we know, Tony, you were handing weapons out to Ukrainians because you want to invade the Donbass in March. We know this. We see it happening. Please sit down, talk to us, stop this nonsense, or else we have no choice. And we ignored them, dismissed it. Ukrainian troops started to mass in February. 60,000 started massing opposite of Donetsk. And the Russians went, hey, you asked for it, you got it. Special military operation. But it didn't happen because Russia can't be trusted. Right. It happened because France can't be trusted. France is the liar. France is the evil partner here. And Macron has just proven that by trying to reinvent history and put the Russians as the bad guys. No, France is the problem, not Russia.
Last question before I let you go. Will Europe and all of these conversations, all of these emergency meetings, all of these things that they're effectively having, will they be able to inhibit, subvert, get in the way of Donald Trump effectively trying to bring this war to an end?
No, they're going to advance Donald Trump's cause by their own inadequacies and incompetence, and the fact that there is no such thing as Europe. I mean, even before this meeting happened, what are the big three economies in Europe that have to work together if they're going to succeed? Forget the British;
Germany,
they're not
France,
part of Europe.
Italy.
Remember Brexit? It's France, Germany, Italy.
Yeah.
All right. So you got the Germans saying no German troops. You got the Italians going, y'all can go play boy games in Ukraine, but no Italian troops are coming. And you got Macron going, we're going to nuke Russia. And so now they're going to get together in this emergency meeting. And I guarantee you some people are going to go, what are you talking about? Nuke Russia. And if I were the Germans, I'd say, wait a minute. You want to put French nuclear weapons on German soil? What's the legal? We already got American nuclear weapons on German soil. That's part of a NATO nuclear deterrence system that's been in place since the 1960s. Now I know that we have trouble with the Americans, but you're talking about replacing this. What agreement do we have? Is it a bilateral agreement between you and? But if it's a bilateral agreement, then it's not really a nuclear umbrella. It's just a nuclear magnet. You've turned Germany and France into a magnet for Russian nuclear weapons, and there won't be an American backstop, so we're all going to die. Are you really that stupid? And the answer to Macron is yes.
Yes.
And then the Americans should be picking up the phone going, hey, Emmanuel, how you doing, man? Yeah, hey, good meeting with you in the White House the other day. We probably should have told you you're dumber than dirt. If you seek to implement these measures that you're talking about, you will be in violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. I want you, remember all those discussions we had about Iran and how we're going to hold them into account, the sanctioning of Iran, the destruction of the Iranian economy, regime change, all those plans we had about Iran. Yeah, we're going to do that to you. Okay, if you are in violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, you represent an existential threat to the United States of America. You execute this plan, you become the enemy. We will shut you down like a bad habit. Emmanuel, all those nuclear power plants you have. France has a lot of nuclear power plants. Where do you get the uranium from, Emmanuel? You ain't going to get it anymore because we're going to shut it down. No more uranium for France. No. And then the nuclear power plants don't work. Oh, France loses. We're used to hearing that. And we're going to hear it again. This is Macron isn't thinking. He's acting as if he's a superpower. France's superpower status only exists because the United States allowed it to happen for political reasons.
Right.
We didn't want France to withdraw from NATO. We had to maintain this front. But today, what is France? It's a pathetic middle-level European country that has no real power. 250 nuclear weapons. Gee, don't even bring that up. Because unlike the United States, which if you tried to do a decapitation strike, we would have sufficient power left over to knock you off the planet. That's why we have nuclear deterrence. France has no nuclear deterrence whatsoever. And if they want to play nuclear bang games with the Russians, by themselves, by the way, walking away from Russia can literally decapitate their nuclear power that quick. France has nothing. I don't understand. If I were the Europeans, I'd be going, why are we even talking about this? Why are we even talking about this? We're setting ourselves up not just to lose, but to be destroyed in the most existential fashion. Nuclear wasteland. Macron is the most dangerous man on the planet right now. The single most dangerous man on the planet. And we need to treat him like that. We really need to call him out and say, you are literally insane. And then we need to do some of our regime change magic. There's time.
He's on the way out. He doesn't even have political legitimacy in France.
But we need to accelerate that.
Yeah. Scott Ritter, man, I always appreciate these conversations. Scott Ritter, he's a former UN weapons inspector and weapons of mass destruction whistleblower. Scott, where can people find you today?
ScottRitter.com is a one-stop shop. You can go there and gain access to my Substack, gain access to the Russia House, which is the new Telegram channel that we're developing, and gain access to programming such as this. When you send me a link, I put it up and I put it out there. So ScottRitter.com.
Excellent, my man. Scott, thank you for this, man. Be safe. Have a good one, okay?
Thanks, you too.
All right, Scott Ritter, always appreciate those conversations. We are going to keep this train rocking. My man, Garland Nixon. He's a political analyst. He is also host of his own show on his own channel, Garland Nixon. How you doing, my man? You doing all right?
Doing great.
I was sitting, we were talking about Macron. Macron recently came out and just lied to the world, lied to France, and made this argument effectively. I'm not going to play it. I'll show it. I mean, it's in French. I don't speak French, so there's that. But he comes out and gives the speech that is unhinged. He is talking about a nuclear deterrent, talking about using nuclear weapons in order to cover Europe, all of this stuff. But he also points out that Russia blew off the Minsk agreements. And as I point out, okay, this is nonsense. Like, for one, you have Hollande right here owning up to the fact that France didn't attend to the agreements. You also have Angela Merkel, who outright came out and said they lied about the Minsk agreements in order to buy time for Ukraine to build up a military. I mean, Europe is unhinged right now. I mean, like, they are literally unhinged. And yet, give me your take on this. For me, this is a show of irrelevance, not a show of strength. It's like strength, it's weakness masquerading as strength. Well, give me your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% that I think they can't face the reality that they've become irrelevant powers. That, I hope I'm not repeating myself. I've said this before. France was this great imperial power with, New Caledonia on one side of the planet and the Sahel region of Africa and other, and now they're losing all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Britain, England is nothing but a little old island on the other side of the English Channel. The best they can do is argue with France over fishing rights. They got nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And these countries are,
That's right.
yeah, and like England, they've got all the accoutrements of they've got a queen and they've got Buckingham Palace. They've got all the things that kind of look like an empire, but they're just another little old island now. And I think, and they've kind of like retreated into madness, and they're just like pretending, shaking their fist at the world. No, we're still a great power, and we say what Russia, you'll do what the United States, you'll do what everybody's got to do what we say. And people are like, oh God, don't do this to yourself, please.
Yeah.
Don't do this to yourself. And here's what's interesting. Their own people hate him. Macron is acting like he's de Gaulle leading the French resistance against the mighty, German Wehrmacht or something. He can't even have an election in his own country. Keir Starmer, that's the other part of it. These people have retreated into such madness that they've got to tell the world that they're great leaders and they could stand up and they're one of the great powers. And they can't even go home. They can't even walk the street. They get booed. If any of them got on stage at a political event, they'd get like tomatoes thrown at them.
Yeah,
I guess baguettes or something, whatever.
Literally.
Yeah, they're terrible. Yeah. That's the sad part, that we talk about their lack of military power, their lack of economic power. But when you get down to it, they don't even have political power at home. You just kind of shake your head and say, how much longer are you going to keep embarrassing yourselves like this?
Yeah, he will lose. I mean, well, he's not even going to be in the next election. But think of just to put so people would know, in the previous European parliamentary elections, Macron's party came in like third, like a distant third. Macron freaked out and was like, I can't believe that Marine Le Pen's party is this popular. And so I'm going to dissolve the French parliament and we're going to have new elections. And what happened? Marine Le Pen's party ends up winning those European elections in the first round. The second round, they end up with this horse trading with these kind of left-wing parties in order to keep Marine Le Pen's party out. And so it's like, he doesn't even have political power at home, let alone standing up as if he's the face of Europe. I mean, this is nonsense. And then he gets out here and just outright lies. And for my take, if you have to lie on a scale like this, then there's something wrong with your argument. And in his case, Macron himself said he wasn't for the Minsk agreements. Angela Merkel owned up to the fact that they lied about the Minsk agreements. Hollande, the previous French president, owned up to the fact that they lied about the Minsk agreements. So it's pretty astonishing when this history is ironclad and he just ignores the history of it. And by the way, lied to Trump about this.
It kind of it makes you go back to like the Middle Ages, like before the so-called Enlightenment period, which apparently there never really was an Enlightenment period in England. We thought there was, but apparently it didn't take, shall we say. The seeds didn't grow. But when everybody could come to a consensus that the world is flat, and if Galileo came along and said, no, the world's not flat, oh, well, you're a heretic, we'll have to burn you at the stake. Isn't that where we are? It's like everybody's like, hey, we've got a consensus that the Russians did it for this reason. And everybody who's like Mearsheimer and everybody's like, man, that's not really what happened. Yes, it is. And you're a Russian evil heretic for saying such a thing. And we're a powerful military and we're going to win. And people are like, nah, it's not really so. And so it's actually pre-Enlightenment thinking where we believe that the earth is flat or whatever. And because we all believe that and we've got its consensus, we're going with that. And rather than accept somebody from the outside, just questioning it, saying, well, let's just look at the actual facts and historical context and things like that. Instead, anyone who says otherwise, they attack the person, call them names. They're a Putin person, they're a Russian, whatever. And it's you look at them and you're like, for the ruling elite, what's obvious, the ruling elite of Europe, when things get tough, they kind of just go back to pre-Enlightenment thinking. and they
Yeah.
grasp onto something that makes them feel good, and then they just hold on to it, and they just almost like it's a blanket. This is my narrative, like a security blanket. They can have like a little blanket like Linus had on Peanuts, you know, security blanket, and they just hug it, and the security blanket says like Putin is an evil guy and he did this, blah blah, and they just hold on it. No, I'm not letting go of this blanket, no matter what.
Yep.
It's sad. At some point, I think the blanket's going to get yanked out of there. I think Trump's like got his head on the blanket, pulling.
Well, see, if you remember though, Joe Biden was the same way. Like it's like they can't go back on the narrative. Like they've invested so much into it over the last several years that they can't. There's no room. There's no wiggle room. There's no, like, they've staked themselves out so politically on this issue that they're stuck with it, even though it's nonsense. And even though the US president at this point has changed the narrative, at the very least in the United States, they can't, it's almost like it takes an election to do it. And so Marine Le Pen is going to win in 2027. Alternative for Deutschland has been gaining in numbers. Many of these right-wing parties in Europe, either in Austria, Robert Fico is one. He's not a right-winger, but still. Karlin Gorgescu in Romania, they are doing everything in their power to keep him out of office. Like
they kidnapped him, didn't they? Like kidnap him and take him to jail or something recently?
Yeah, they effectively detained him, and are investigating the guy. I mean, they're just making this up as they go along. Just astonishing stuff. Stephen A. Smith. Everybody who watches the shows knows I am fascinated by The View. These like just chirpers, right? like, and they bring various people on, but they clearly have their own political ideology, especially Whoopi, especially Joy Behar. They are liberal to the core. They are Democrat supporters. And I say Democratic supporters, meaning there's no value set underneath, short of we must support Democrats. So Stephen A. Smith, who's been very critical of the Democratic Party, goes on to The View. And he puts a knife in Joy Behar in the most fascinating of ways, and he is completely right. I want to get your take on this. So this is Smith talking to the ladies of The View, treacherous territory sometimes. But Smith, who I have issues with, he does it well.
We've been in office for 6 weeks. Seems like 6 years, hasn't it? Mm-hmm. And he's been going around with his cronies touting his so-called landslide and blowout win. But he won the popular vote by 1.5%, one of the smallest ever. And he won the general election by less than 50%. So what kind of mandate is this really?
Well, it is a mandate, and I'm going to explain why. And I don't mind the question, but let me be very clear. I'm no supporter of Trump. I'm a supporter of truth and the facts. And here's the facts. The man won every swing state. He increased in terms of his voter turnout in his favor from the standpoint of blacks, Latinos, and young voters. He increased his numbers in that regard in 2020. 89% of the counties shifted to the right. That's a mandate. We can sit up there and play around all we want to. In 2020, Trump didn't win the popular vote. He didn't win the electoral college vote. A matter of fact, the Republicans hadn't won the popular vote, if I remember correctly, since 2004. But they did this year. So 20 years after they last won the popular vote, they won the popular vote. They won the electoral college vote. Man won every swing state. And on top of it, 89% of the counties shifted against. I don't understand how people can look at that and say, there's no mandate. There's a mandate.
Well, it's a different definition of a mandate, I guess.
But the problem is that if you're the Democratic Party and you lost 49.8% to 48.3%, and you're looking at that 1.5% dip, that's an excuse for you to say, what we did really wasn't that bad.
Some people didn't
we should continue to do that.
Right there. It's that. He's so right. And by the way, I've made the same argument. When people be like, yeah, but it's only 1%. It's like, but dude, when is the last time a Republican won the popular vote? Like that is, Democrats at one point believed that they were mathematically enshrined into winning every election. And because they got that thought, we don't have to do anything different. Mathematically, by focusing on issues of identity, blacks, Hispanics, Asians, etc., Muslims, we would just win in perpetuity. And Trump showed that wasn't true. And not just showed it wasn't true, as he points out, increased in all of these minorities, increased in all of these counties, and increases tally. I guess my point is, it's not redefining what a mandate is. It's pointing out that the Republican overperformed to such a degree that you can make an argument it is indeed a mandate. And Democrats are like, well, it's only 1%. It's not really just 1%. It's 1% plus whatever he had to overcome to get to that 1%. He's right. He's so right.
The other, well, a couple of things. One of the things that he gets into is, and this is important, the trend. And when you're looking at statistics, one of the issues with statistics, a significant issue, is how are things trending, right? And if you see someone think that have been trending in one direction, and they suddenly reverse the trend, and they reverse the trend in a dramatic fashion, and that's what he was bringing up. And being a sports guy, he's looking at this team. He's looking at this NBA team. They started at the beginning of the season, they weren't doing good, and when it gets towards the end of the season, they're playing better and better. They're trending better. Well, and he'll say, well, going into the playoffs, they're trending well. They've been playing better the last 20 games, right? So that's something automatically in his mind. But as a sports person, I love sports too, is those trends and those things behind the numbers. You know what I mean? And he gets into, well, think about this. Well, these teams are playing. This team plays better against teams that pass or against teams that. So he's looking at all of these details and he's like, every single number says this guy overcame everything. There's something else that you have to take into account, and I think it's critical that even he wouldn't and they wouldn't talk about that. He went in with 3 arms tied behind his back. They charged him with every charge they could. All the major news shows attacked him nonstop for the last 8 years, right? You can say it was fair or not. I'm not a Trump supporter, and I don't think it was fair, right? So they attacked him. They beat him up in every way. They charged him with 1 million charges. The entire intelligence community conspired to call him some kind of a Russian asset. So not only did he win in the conventional numbers, he overcame this not so clandestine attack from the entire establishment machine, from Europe to Australia to New Zealand to Canada. You got to look at that and say, hey, he won. And the other part is important, is what you said in the end. To some extent, it seems like the Democrats are making an excuse saying we don't have to do anything different. And I always say to people, they're like, well, I think she was a good candidate. I said, great, you should just run her again in 2028. She can't possibly lose. I say, run her again. Perhaps but go with a trans candidate. Just go with the same thing you're doing now, a trans candidate and Kamala Harris, and you can't possibly lose if you think that'll work.
Yep.
Double down, triple down.
So true. And by the way, I've heard people say that. It's like, we should run her again.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, good luck with that. Good luck with that. I really do think that's what it is. I've brought people on the show and I've asked them, like, if you listen to Hakeem Jeffries, and he would say it's a messaging issue. And it's like, dude, it's not a messaging issue. When Jon Stewart was pushing him, saying, hey, what about this New Deal politics stuff? He's like, yeah, it's a messaging. We need to make people feel better. I really do think that somewhere along the way, they got into their minds, we are mathematically fixed into winning going forward. We may lose on a random election, but mathematically, the demographics are with us. And Trump showed that wasn't true. And instead of them just kind of being like, okay, this is a wake-up call, their response is, yeah, but it was only 1%. It's close. It's 1%. I'm going to play Whoopi. Whoopi also gets involved, gets into it with Stephen A. Smith, and again, nails it to the wall.
It's not about him winning. It was an indictment against the Democratic Party and what the Democratic Party was offering to American citizens. We might sit up there and talk about, hey, you should be a party for the working class, which the Democratic Party was once known for. They're not known for that right now. Why? Because their message was catering towards others and towards other issues. And they forgot about the people that brought them there, that elevated the Democratic Party to what it was over these last few decades. That's why they lost. He didn't win.
Well,
the
let's
Democrats
remind
lost.
people what those issues were.
Sure.
Let's remind people what those issues were.
We can do that.
Making sure that families had what they need, SNAP, making sure stuff is there, making sure that the America that we all grew up in, where you could come and be whoever you were supposed to be or want to be, you still have that right. All these things are the things that the Democrats have always said. But now we have a guy who says, yeah, I'm going to bring down the price of eggs. But first, I'm going to cut all these jobs, and I'm not going to see why they need to be cut. I'm just going to cut them. because I'm going to put people in. Well, that's what he's doing. He's doing all
and
stuff.
alienate all our friends around the world.
But you're talking about what he's doing. But before you brought that up, you brought up the message that the Democratic Party was disseminating. I'm challenging you on that. That is not what they were doing. I'm not talking
yes,
about.
it was.
I'm not talking about the intent.
We did it.
Wait, I was here too. I was alive and breathing right here on the air talking to everybody else.
He's right. He's so right. He's so right. Like, I love that clip because Whoopi, if you notice, she starts off, the Democratic Party was doing so-and-so. And then she immediately flips to, and now Donald Trump said he was going to lower the price of eggs and he didn't lower the price of eggs. And it's like, well, wait a minute. You noted what the Democratic Party said they were. That is not what they were doing. Meaning, regardless of what they vocally claimed that they represented, when they were in office, they didn't do those things, nor did they run on those things. I mean, they ran with Liz Cheney around the country screaming about transatlantic gangs, and for that part, that we're going to fight Vladimir Putin for as long as it takes, despite the fact that we've lost the war, and backing a genocide in Gaza. His point is, it's one thing if you were pushing for New Deal politics. It's one thing if that was the fight that you were having with Trump. That is not the fight that you were having with Trump, nor is that the things that you are representing. Whoopi is in a fantasy land. Like, and this argument where it's like it's entirely reflexive against Trump or entirely reactive to Trump is problematic. It's one thing if they represented something and they were fighting Trump from a value set. That's not what's happening. And that's what Stephen A. Smith is trying to nail down to Whoopi Goldberg. You are not what you say you represent. That is not what you do when you're in that office, nor is that what you campaigned on. Oh, I love that clip. I love that clip. Give me your take on this.
Well, a couple of things. Number one, she did two things. She addressed two things. SNAP, which is helping the poor. Number two, she went right to identity politics. Oh, everybody can be what they want to be in there, blah, 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 right? Okay, number one, as you said, this is what we heard. We got to send another $60 billion to Ukraine and $700 or something for you if your house gets washed away in North Carolina, burned up, trains turn over in East Palestine. They don't even get anything. So the idea that the Democratic Party is standing up for the poor or the working class, again, Steve A. Smith blew that right off. He says, that's what you say. That's not what they did. Right. That's number one. Then she went straight to identity politics. Well, the bottom line is this. Okay, fine. You went to identity politics. And people rendered their verdict. Face it. You were like, well, we're standing. I mean, for some reason, some genius in the party Democratic Party decided that they wanted to stand on the hill of trans kids or something like that. Look, when you're picking, you can feel good about what you're doing. But if you're picking trans women in sports, that's like 80 to 90% of the people ain't for that. You can take a moral position on that, but when you lose, it is what it is. You decided. That's one of the things I think that's important that too. The Democratic Party went from politics. No, we're not for politics. We're for morality. The morality. We stand for the trans and for the whatever, right? Well, moral position. Everything's moral with them, which is why they can't back down. If you build your platform on morality, why are you standing for this group? Because it's moral. Why are you doing this? It's moral. Why are you standing up against Putin? Because he's evil and we're good. It's a moral position. Why are you standing up against, I don't know, Maduro, whoever? They're an evil dictator. It's a moral position. So in building all of their platform on good versus evil. We're standing up to the evil Putin, the evil Trump, the evil anti-trans people, whatever, right? You can't change. You can't suddenly say, okay, we've decided we're going to go along with the evil people. You've created a paradigm where you're good and they're evil. You got to stay in that paradigm. How do you release yourself from this paradigm that you've built with all of your voters? Why are you standing up to Putin? Because he's evil and we're good. Trump, he's evil, we're good. How do you wake up one day and say, okay, well, we're going to make a deal, but you told me he was evil.
Yeah.
They're trapped in a moral paradigm that's not political. And there's no way out of that. They just have to defend it. No matter what, they got to defend it. Even if they lose, they have to defend it because it's moral. They can't ever admit. How can they come out and say we were wrong if everything they chose was you're either with us or you're with the terrorists?
Do you think they really believe that stuff? I don't think they believe that stuff in real terms. I get the sense that they looked at identity as a way of avoiding basically, we need to get our voting block, but we need to do so without going with an economic populist rationale for it. And so you get people like third-way Democrats like Bill Clinton, who looks at the left and say, you have nowhere else to go. There's that. And then you get people like Hillary Clinton that focuses on, I'm a woman, it's my turn. Let's break these groups up into identities. It's almost as if they took the wrong message from the civil rights movement, that everything's a civil rights movement now, as opposed to, this notion of Martin Luther King, out there protesting for $2 extra for minimum wage, meaning for him, it was economic. You can't have this notion of identity liberation in the way that they're talking about it without having some level of economic, leeway, some level of economic liberation for the individuals that are involved. They have somehow severed this idea of economic populism from this idea of identity and just focused on identity. And so I don't I take it as they did that for political reasons. Do you think they actually believe in the stuff that they're spewing with us? Give me your take on this. I'm curious.
Well, I think it gets back to Macron, what we said in the first place, saying things that were demonstrably false, that empirical evidence would clearly show that he was wrong, right? But he's trapped. He can't let go of that, right? I think it's the same thing. I think it gets to a point when you wrap everything you're doing in falsehoods. At some point, it doesn't matter if it's true anymore. You're so wedded to it, you can't let go of it. It's there was I forgot his name. There was a book. What the guy talked about is a person being apathetic about the truth. I don't care if it's true or false. I got to hold on to this. If it happens to be true, fine. If it happens to be false, fine. But so now I think the people the leaders of the Democratic Party are like Macron. It doesn't matter if it's true or false. We're going with this. We've decided we're rolling with this. We can't let go. I do think there's a lot of people in the party who have been indoctrinated kind of into like a cult, which is why the leaders are in such trouble, because you convince these people of falsehoods and you got the people at the bottom really believe it. How do you make a U-turn? Because Putin's evil, Putin's evil, Putin's evil. We can't ever work with Putin. Okay. And they all agree. And then you wake up one day and you say, that doesn't work anymore. I guess we got to change it. Hey guys, guess what? Putin's not evil anymore. You know what your cult followers say? Oh, so now you're working with Putin too. You've trapped yourself because they all believe it. Even though you're a politician, it's an argument of convenience. Look at Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio was the neocon of all neocons. He wakes up one day, Trump brings him in. Hey, you with me or against me? And Rubio says, am I going to get this position? Yeah, I'll do a 180 on everything I believe about being a neocon. He couldn't stand for a damn thing. When he got that Secretary of State position, he did a 360, as our girl Annalena Baerbock would say. He never stood for anything. Yeah. Right. So these kind of people at the top, they don't give a crap. They can do a 180, but they've trapped themselves because they've convinced their cult followers, and now they're cult followers. And it's like the view, they're like when the Pope makes an edict and all the priests below him all have to preach this is true. That's what they are. When the leaders of the Democratic Party say this is true, the view are like the high priests who have to go out and preach the gospel of what their leaders have told them. That's all they do. And attack anybody. You're a devil. You're a demon. You won't go along with what the popes up at at the DNC headquarters have told us is the new reality.
Wow. Yeah, they're trapped in their own narratives. Very true. I so agree with you on that. I mean, there's no way to back away. There's no way to back out.
You know what? Doesn't it seem like also like with Macron and these Europeans with Putin is evil, and he really just woke up one day and attacked the whole thing that they push, whether they believe it or not. Doesn't it seem like to them to lose that narrative is tantamount to death? Literally, they're like ready to go to nuclear war and die and kill everybody on the continent, rather than simply admit they're like, I'd rather die, because if it's proven that I'm just a lying scumbag, then I'm effectively dead. I'd rather die. I'll go down. I'll die and take everybody with me before I will admit that my paradigm is a pile of horse manure.
As I pointed out, Europe started 2 world wars, and they seem to be headset on starting a third. And they don't it's like they never get the message. It's like, dude, you keep doing this nonsense. Here's something else that was so absurd and I want to get your take on Trump's speech. In fact, let me do that first. What was your take on Trump's? It came across like a State of the Union, even though it wasn't really a State of the Union. It was this kind of joint message to Congress. Give me your take on that speech. I was talking to Ted the other day, and Ted trashed it like nobody's business, but he trashed it for a very specific reason. Give me your take on it.
It was a lot of rambling. It was typical Trump to me. I didn't take a lot out of it. He said all of the stuff that he said. Oh, to me, what I heard from Trump is the stuff that he said over and over and over again. So I was looking for something kind of new.
Yeah.
What I thought, but there was nothing new there. He just reiterated the stuff he's been saying. We'll take Canada and Greenland, whatever. We want peace. But what's interesting is that he cast himself as the guy for peace. And the Democrats solidified their position as the party of war. And as the brilliant Tony Montero has said, Dr. Tony Montero said, I've repeated it over and over again. You can't be the party of the people and the party of war. The party of peace will always be viewed as the party of the people, even if they're not. I'm not saying that the Republicans are the party of the people. God knows neither of these are the party of the people. But if you're going to carry that mantle, right, you got to be the party of peace. And what happens? Trump came in arguing peace. He had to win. Of course he was going to win. I'm going to end the war. Yeah. If there's wars going on and you run and say, I'm going to end the war. Look what Zelensky did right now. You run and say, I'm going to end the war. Yeah, you're probably going to win. Not probably about it. And the Democrats were like, they had their blue yellow, as I call it, all of the propaganda, blue and yellow on. Mm-hmm. They stood for war. He stood for peace. And afterwards, Bernie comes out, how dare him not stand up for war? They have taken their position as the party of war, which means they're just going to continue to go down. Even a lot of people are like, well, if the economy goes bad, then for Trump, he's done. Well,
oh, you don't think so?
If he ends the wars, he still has a chance. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. If he's able, let's say going into the midterms, Donald Trump has done he talks a lot of crap about the Middle East. I dismiss it. Oh, they better do this or else. I'll wait and see what he does in the Middle East. You know what I mean? I'll believe it when I see it. But what happens going into the midterms if they've gotten some kind of a two-state solution and the Saudis and whoever are going to in the process of rebuilding some houses and buildings or something in Gaza, if the war in Ukraine is over and they got some kind of deal going there and that stuff, and he goes into the midterms and says, there you go, I ended both wars. Democrats are toast.
Yeah, I did.
I think they're toast. And I mean, there's things he's doing that I'm very upset about, firing the federal workers. All of us who consider ourselves lefty, we stand up for the working class, working families. Fair enough.
Oh, I
understand what's going on.
Agreed.
It burns me up. But if he ends the wars, look, I mean, while particularly in our region, it affects a lot of us. There are a lot of areas. I mean, you go to some areas, there's no federal employees at all. Most areas, and let's face it, he really didn't win DC, Maryland, and Virginia, where the bulk of the federal employees are anyway. Nor does he have any members of Congress there. So the reality is, then it becomes a filibuster. What is it? A filibuster proof.
Oh, filibuster. Yeah,
filibuster. Majority in the Senate, and then he's a steamroller. And then I'll put it like this: if they don't lose seats in the midterms, if he wins in the midterms, you have to start asking the question: is the Democratic Party a viable party anymore? What do they do if the war is in Ukraine ends? What do they do if it ends? Do they keep shaking their fists and saying, "Boo! He ended the war. We will never forgive him for that"? Are they going to run on the midterms? Vote for us, and we'll start the war back up again.
Dude, that is such a good point. Because under normal circumstances, the opposition party wins in the midterms, which guts the president's power going forward. I mean, that's kind of the typical way it's been going. What happens if that doesn't happen, though? Like if he starts to gain or he gains more in the midterms, that is a death nail. Meaning from his standpoint and the standpoint of political power, it only increases if he gains in the midterms. Democrats are going to have to win something in the midterms if they're going to show themselves to be viable. They put this out, and I'm glad. I don't know who put this together. I'm glad they did. Look at this.
When I will immediately bring prices down starting on day one.
That ain't true. That's what you just heard. Since day one, Donald Trump's presidency, prices are not down. They're up. Inflation is getting worse. Prices gross.
These goofballs came out and effectively put out the exact same video. They put out the exact same video. And somebody combined all of them together to show that they were effectively putting out the exact same message all together in the way that they're going about this. I mean, this is absurd. This is so absurd. And yet this, come on, there we are. They put out the exact same message in the exact same way, in exact same similar video. All of them looked the same, and all of them were saying the exact same thing. They don't even have this is so trash. And you know, the voters have noticed. And one of the polling that recently came out, this is Politico, pointed out that the voters say Democrats don't have their act together. They don't know how to go after Donald Trump. They don't know how to contest them. Voters still have a sour view of Democrats 6 weeks after President Donald Trump and Republicans swept into Washington and took control of all branches of the federal government. A plurality of voters, 40%, said the Democratic Party doesn't have any strategy whatsoever for responding to Donald Trump, according to a survey by liberal firm Blueprint that was shared first with Politico. Another 24% said Democrats have a game plan, but a bad one. So 40% said they don't know what they're doing. Another 24% say they know what they're doing, but it's a bad idea, even though they have an idea of what they're doing. So you're getting like, what, 64% of the group saying either they have a bad plan or no plan at all in order to deal with Donald Trump. I think that's true, by the way. I think that's true. Give me your thoughts. And one last point. It said voters correctly identified the Democratic Party has lost its way, said even Roth Smith, a poster for Blueprint. The Democratic response on Tuesday night was more or less a continuation of what we've seen for Democrats so far, which is there was nothing overtly wrong about it, but it didn't actually do anything to ameliorate the core issues that Democrats face, which is voters aren't quite sure what we stand for and would like us to get back to the basic principles of the party. So the posters are telling them this. The voters are telling them this. Liberal groups have been screaming this at Democrats. Jon Stewart, of all people, told Hakeem Jeffries, ostensibly the leader of the Democratic Party, they need to get back to basics. And none of these people seem to be getting the message, or at the very least believe the message and believe that the issue is messaging, not substance. Fantastic. Give me your thoughts, Garland. I'm sorry.
You know, one of the things you have to do to improve yourself in life is self-awareness. You have to be able to look at yourself and say, you know, sometime a guy has a girlfriend or something and she says, you don't listen. Well, maybe he should sit there and think to himself, you know, I probably run my yap too much and maybe I need to try to listen to her a little bit more. Or maybe one day, if he loves her a lot and maybe he wants to one day marry her and he wakes up and she's gone. Why'd she leave? I told you never listen and you wouldn't listen to me. And he didn't listen and say, you know, I might need to do something about that. You're right, to improve myself, right? Self-awareness. For the last 8 years, the Democrats were Donald Trump's a Russian bot. Donald Trump's a racist. Donald Trump's a crazy person. Donald Trump's this. Donald Trump's that. Here's a severed head of Donald Trump. Here's a meme of Donald Trump looking stupid. Here's something bad about. So all they did was attack. I watched a interview with Kamala Harris, and every question they asked her, what are you going to do about this? Well, Donald Trump's doing that. What are your plans? Oh, well, Donald Trump says this. Well, what do you say about that?
That's what Whoopi Goldberg did too. If you remember, where she's like, oh, well, Trump is doing this.
Right. Yeah. So you, in your circles, that works. You all sit around and talk about how bad Trump is. Well, that's great. But you guys are already hate Trump. So they don't have any other strategy, and they've trained themselves that Donald Trump is so bad that all they have to do is talk about how bad he is. And if everybody just understood just how bad Donald Trump was, but it doesn't work and they can't let go because they don't have a better strategy. Number two, it goes back to something that I said earlier. Look, if you're the moral party, you don't need to change, right? Everything they're standing for is righteous and moral. Yep. So it would actually be evil for them to change. We're standing for this group and that group. We're standing against dictators. We're doing this and that, right? So if someone says, well, perhaps you should change your foreign policy, but we're standing against dictators. Our foreign policy is good, and we stand for democracy in the American way. Okay, so you don't need to change your foreign policy. No, but people hate it. Well, they need to come around and understand that you know what I mean? That everything is morality with them. So because they believe they're good and they've convinced themselves good and moral, they don't need to look, we need to communicate differently. What does that come down to? They need to understand that we're the good guys. We're not communicating well enough to the people that we're good and that Trump is evil. That's all we have to do. There's no foundation to it. There's no personal insight there. There's nothing, just self-assessment. There's no way to fix that because they don't think they need to be fixed. They think the voters need to be fixed.
Yeah. You know, it's funny when Cenk Uygur on TYT was like, okay, maybe we have a problem and maybe we need to make adjustments. People, all corners of Democrat adjacent media flipped out, shouting about how dare you. Uygur was going on for show after show after show while all of these people were just yelling at Uygur because they tilted at all. And it was like, oh, they're taking a right-wing tilt. They're becoming fascists. He tweaked like one issue and they lost their minds. And 2 points. I agree with you. If you think you're moral, if you think you're morally superior, it is hard to change if you think you're morally superior. And what's wild about it, I really do think this is a remnant of the civil rights movement. Like the Democratic Party attached itself to the civil rights movement on that issue. They were right. The country shifted on that issue, especially in regards to blacks and gays, etc. And I think somewhere along the way, they took that and expanded it to everything. And so in their minds, we were right on this. We were on the right side of history on this. And so anything that we incorporate into our political philosophy, we are also somehow on the right side of, also missing the fact that they're not. Like they're missing the boat. It's like it's one thing for you to say that you represent something. It's another thing for you to actually go through and do it. You're saying it, you're not doing it. You're presenting this image of yourself in tones that don't really exist in the real world. And for the second thought, you're absolutely right. When they were going after Trump, everything was about Trump. So any question you asked Kamala Harris, it was about Trump. Anything you talked to Democrats about, it was about Trump. But Whoopi Goldberg in that statement, fully about Trump. Oh, Democrats are blah, 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 blah. But Trump said about the eggs, if you, in chess, I'd use chess logic. If you build up a huge defense in chess and the theme of the game becomes about that defense and that defense is broken, you lose. You lose. There's nothing else. Like there's nothing for you to make it up with. It's like all of your energy went into this thing that no longer exists. And when you have an election where you not just lose the popular vote, you lose the electoral college by a magnificent degree. The American public adjudicated your argument. They adjudicated you and they found you lacking. And so it's like, okay, if you built up everything around this edifice of Trump is bad, Trump is evil, Trump is Hitler, Trump is a fascist, all of these people are fascists, all of these people are trash. And you go to the election and the American public says, we don't buy it. You lose. Okay, then what do you cobble together after the fact? Everything that you've invested has been invested into this device of we're all about being against Trump. Your entire personality has become effectively, we are against Trump. And the American public didn't buy it. So what do you do now? I think that's their issue. It's, we don't have anything else. Like there is no other device that we can cobble together in order to come up with a defense, because our defense has been fundamentally broken. And it's not like you have anything to fall back on where, okay, we're going to deal with jobs. We're going to deal with workers. We're going to deal, okay, well, those aren't part of the devices that you were using for the last several years of hell, for the last 8 years, in order to kind of wage this political war against your opponent. So I think they're in this kind of phase of, okay, now what? And all of the public is telling them, go back to basics, go back to what the Democratic Party was supposed to represent. And they're like, yeah, but that's not really a good funding model. That's not really a model for us to get money from billionaires and millionaires. If we indeed we're going to go back to this economic populism that was part of New Deal politics. Hell, they got rid of those New Deal people intentionally under the Bill Clinton era. And so it's like they have nothing to go back to because they ultimately representing nothing but being in opposition to Trump. And they lost on that issue. At least that's my take. I could be wrong.
No, I think your points are good. And here's the other thing that I think is critical too. The party is realigned to some extent. People are asking for something from a party that ain't what it is anymore. You know,
Agreed.
My team, I used to be a fan of the Washington football team, and they were a running team. Well, I want them to run. Well, now they'll set up. Let's say now they're set up as a passing team. You may want them to run, but they can't run no more. They don't have the players for that. They're now set up as a passing team, right? Okay. Their foreign policy team, they've realigned with John Bolton. They've realigned with Bill Kristol. They've realigned. These are the people who are in power positions and philosophically guide the party, right? So that ain't who that party is anymore. It's realigned. You can't ask for a party to do something. A party that is aligned with Bill Kristol and John Bolton are going to focus on causing mischief and mayhem around the world and standing up to dictators and building up the military so we'll have the most lethal army. As that's the kind of things you say if your party is the party of John Bolton. Hey, what do we have to say on the campaign trail? Here's the plan. Say, we're going to have the most lethal military ever, and we're standing up to Putin and Xi and Iran. That's what you say now, because that's what that party is. What they can't talk about is this. Trump's bad, blah, blah, blah. Well, perhaps if you listen to him, this is what you get. Perhaps we should have, Joe Biden should have got out earlier. Perhaps we should have had we should have ran Kamala. Perhaps, well, wait a minute. Perhaps we should actually talk about the way you governed for the last 4 years.
Yeah.
Perhaps we should talk about the G word, Gaza. Shh, don't bring that up. That's a big reason you lost. The big reasons that you lost, Gaza is a huge one. So even if I don't say Gaza, foreign policy. I don't know how many people in the Black community that either stayed home or voted for Trump that I heard say they're always sending all this money to Ukraine. And I'm sure you heard it too. Why all this money got to go to Taiwan, Ukraine, Israel? There's nothing for us. What about, and boy, that's $740 to North Carolina per person was really
that's a slap in the face,
man. That really, it was like just an exclamation mark, screaming out loud. We got nothing for our people here at all. Goes so their focus on warmongering, their aggressive, assertive foreign policy, imperial foreign policy, was absolutely deadly. And they can't do it because they came in the other night with blue and yellow ties doing the same thing. That's who they are. I just think the party continues to, it's like Macron. They're tied to these, they're wedded to these absurd imperial warmongering tropes. They can't let them go. And so the Democratic Party, we got to start thinking about what new kind of party might need to arise because these clowns are toast.
Do you think a new party could arise? And this could be the last question. I mean, something has to change. And I don't know what that. Something has to change. That party doesn't seem to get it. It doesn't seem to be able to take place in the party. And one last point: if you remember, they were Justice Democrats, and their thought was, we are going to change the Democratic Party. We're going to go in and we're going to change the mechanisms of the party. We're going to make it something else. Okay, that failed. That failed miserably. Can there be something else?
Not in the Democratic Party, apparently, because all they do is they're going to crush, because the Justice, what they were actually saying was, we're the left flank of the Democratic Party, and so the left flank of the Democratic Party is going to take over the whole party. Well, what did we have? After 2008, the Tea Party arose. The Tea Party was looking around for a leader. Up pops Donald Trump. As they say, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, right? The Tea Party, we talked about them. And what were they? They were pissed over the 2008 crash. And they were pissed over what? They were pissed really bad over the bailouts. Along comes Trump. He's the populist leader. And that Tea Party is MAGA. That's the same people in MAGA. Boop, they went to Trump, and Trump marshaled this populist group. And then the Democrats got so far to the right and so warmongering that a whole bunch of their people got desperate. Look, I say this, RFK Jr., and Tulsi Gabbard could beat anybody if they ran in 2024. They would have won. I guarantee, because they're reasonable. I disagree with them on Gaza, certainly. But if you listen to what they say, they're smart people.
Yeah.
And they would have won. They got ran out of the Democratic Party because they're smart people and they would have won.
Like viciously attacked.
Oh, yeah.
Viciously attacked.
And they brought a good percentage with them.
Elon Musk, he used to be a Democrat. Joe Rogan used to be a Democrat. I mean, like, all of these people were Democrats.
I used to be a Democrat. You probably were. You a Democrat?
I used to be a Democrat.
Oh, everybody used to be a Democrat. Well, I'm noticing a pattern here.
And by the way, I didn't change. Nothing to me changed. They just became lunatics. Garland, man, my audience loves you. We have a fantastic crowd here today. We're up to 620. They love you today. They always ask,
man, you're growing, dude. You're growing.
I hit my 40K. I blew through it yesterday. So
awesome.
Garland Nixon, political analyst. Garland, and check Garland out on his show. He has some damn good interviews on that show. The Garland Nixon channel. Definitely check him out. Garland, can people find you anywhere else other than your channel?
On Facebook, well, I'm on Rumble and Rockman also. So follow me on Rumble also. I do that because you never, I put everything on Rumble and you never know what YouTube's going to do. And some shows that they throw, YouTube gets rid of, people can still go to Rumble to watch them. So
check them out.
Both places there.
Badass.
I'll be on this morning at 10. You're off at 10, right?
Yeah, I'm off at 10.
I'm 10. I'll be on with Scott Ritter.
Oh, you're going to have Ritter on too? Okay, fantastic. I'm going to end this. Garland, thank you, my man. You have a fantastic day. Okay.
All right. Talk to you soon. Bye.
All righty. Bye-bye. Love that guy. Love that guy. Garland was the one that gave me my break into radio. He has my infinite appreciation to the end of my day. On my last breath, he would have my appreciation. Definitely check him out at 10. Ritter is going to be on that show. Coming up is Caleb Maupin. In fact, not just coming up, he's actually here. Let's bring him on. We are joined. How you doing, my man? Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. How you doing, Caleb? You doing all right this morning?
I'm great. How about yourself?
I am doing good. Better that you are with me. I have been following some of the wild events that have been taking place, and I want to get yours on a few of them. One of them has to do with this issue of quote unquote free speech. Donald Trump is arguing free speech is back. I am the avatar of free speech, while simultaneously cracking down on college campuses, even to the point of saying we're kicking people out of the country if they criticize Israel and Gaza. Okay, this is outrageous. And, when Vance was over in Europe, basically browbeating Europeans, and by the way, accurately browbeating Europeans. You guys are canceling elections. You're putting people in prison. They locked up Richard Medhurst in Vienna, Austria, most likely on behalf of the Brits for his reporting on the issue of Gaza and Israel. So Vance is right. And I remember when Vance was giving that speech, I was like, he's right, but let's see if it applies to the sacred ponies back in the U.S., such as the issue of Israel and Gaza. And lo and behold, it does not. Give me your take on this. You can't have this idea that you're an avatar of free speech, but then when it hits a topic that you don't particularly like, you try to redefine it as anti-Semitism to criticize Israel for genocide. It's just outrageous.
Yeah, I mean, Trump is clearly grandstanding for his pro-Israel supporters.
Yes.
And the thrust of what he is saying is absolutely wrong. I mean, you should be able to criticize Israel all you want. You should be able to protest for any political cause, and Israel's crimes are reprehensible and the Palestinians are right. And what I do have questions about, right, is I've noticed that some of the statements Trump makes are oddly worded, right? Like one of them is he will cut off the funding, he said, for any university that allows illegal protests. Well, if a protest is illegal, by definition, it's not allowed. So what does that mean? Like no campus allows illegal protests. So I'm just like, what does that mean? You know what I'm saying? And I know there is one student who's a Chinese national who was deported, was arrested and deported for leading protests. And I oppose that. Obviously, I think students that are studying here have the right to engage in political dissent, etc.
That's right.
And that shouldn't happen. But I guess I wonder how much of this is just Trump beating his chest to show off to his base. I mean, if indeed they are seriously going to every campus and trying to arrest and deport, every student who's engaged in a Palestine protest, that's obviously wrong. And I oppose that. I'm not sure that's actually happening. I mean, this seems like Trump.
Pam Bondi apparently came out and is opening right here. Pam Bondi opened an investigation into alleged quote unquote anti-Semitism at the University of California. So they are trying to put the screws to these various schools using whatever mechanism they have at their disposal at the White House.
I mean, it looks to me like they're putting on a show, is what it looks to me. It looks like they're pandering very hard to pro-Israel people who don't like these protests, and I oppose that. I mean, I think that the protesters are correct, that we shouldn't be spending money on Israel. We shouldn't be funding Israel's crimes. And so to the extent that Donald Trump is pandering to them and making statements that indicate somehow it's wrong for college students to use their free speech to criticize Israel, he's wrong in doing so. I just... I am careful with, I get the impression when I look at social media coming from the left that you're getting the impression that he's like engaging in like a fascist crackdown and roundup. And I'm not seeing that.
No.
So
I agree with you that some of the stuff is, I got elected on Israel first. I'm going to do any and everything in my power, including redefine free speech as anti-Semitism. And I'm going to do anything in my power as administration to make life miserable for people who are protesting Israel. That's the sense of it that I get. I'm saying it's outrageous that the president is getting involved in this nonsense at all. But to be fair, so is Joe Biden. That's the problem the Democrats have, right? If you remember, I remember Joe Biden made the speech for Black Lives Matter. And Black Lives Matter, the protesters, now keep in mind, like 95% were peaceful protests. However, there were excesses, to put it mildly, in burning down police stations, setting up these, areas where they didn't want cops in and those type of things. And I remember Joe Biden went out and made a speech effectively defending all of it and just kind of yada-yadaing excesses. Meaning, in that context, he was perfectly okay with defending protests, despite the fact that those protests were taking place all across the U.S. The protests against against Israel for what they were doing in Gaza, basically their genocide, those were peaceful protests. They all throughout, they were peaceful. And Joe Biden comes out and picks up one or two issues and acts as if that is all of the protests. Like these protests are violent. They're going after Jewish students. None of these things were in fact true. Meaning he was shaping his speech based upon his own political priorities, regardless of the realities on the ground associated with what he was talking about. Trump is doing something very similar. And so it's a bit rich for Democrats to complain about what Trump is doing on this front when Joe Biden was doing something very similar. So I feel you. I get it. It's still problematic. I don't want him kicking people out of the country.
I don't either.
Protesting a genocide.
Yeah. And I don't agree with what he's saying, but I think it's interesting because at the same time, now it's revealed he's actually negotiating directly with Hamas, which Biden refused to do. So, I mean, it looks to me like he's on the defensive because he's actually doing that. So he has to, he made some pretty crazy tweets yesterday. And, he's making these statements about the protesters and stuff. And it's like, a lot of his supporters are pro-Israel. And he's actually negotiating directly with Hamas, which Biden refused to do, which U.S. government has generally refused to do, right? Considers them to be terrorists, et cetera. So it looks like there might be a slight move in a good direction with Gaza coming from the Trump administration. So they really have to, go over the top to show that they're with Israel. And, they're trying to cover themselves almost.
I agree with Garland on this. What Garland points out, Garland's thing is like, I'm going to wait and see what Trump does, not what he says, because he says such crazy things. But, like you pointed out, he could be saying those crazy things because, look, I am of mind, and I know a lot of people would disagree with me on this, that all things being equal, he wants to maintain the peace deal in Israel. He wants to maintain that deal between Israel and Gaza, despite the fact that Netanyahu does not. Mm-hmm. And if that's your political positioning, then you might come out and make crazy statements. Oh, we're going to destroy everybody in Gaza if they don't do so and so and so and so. But then, as you pointed out, behind the scenes, despite the fact that he's saying that, they're admitting, yes, we are in direct talks with Hamas. Now, who the hell knows what those talks are? But this is press secretary talking about it.
Why is the U.S. now negotiating directly and for the first time ever with Hamas?
Well, when it comes to the negotiations that you're referring to, first of all, the special envoy who's engaged in those negotiations does have the authority to talk to anyone. Israel was consulted on this matter. And look, dialogue and talking to people around the world to do what's in the best interest of the American people is something that the president has proven is what he believes is good faith effort to do what's right for the American people.
Is it just about the hostages, or are they also talking about the president's plan to take over Gaza?
These are ongoing talks and discussions. I am not going to detail them here. There are American lives at stake. I would defer you to the Department of State for further details, but I'm not going to get into those talks here.
That is fascinating. As she pointed out, for the first time ever, they are in talks with Hamas. And I love her defense of this. It is not a negative to talk to people who we disagree with.
Right.
Oh, I love that. Like, that is so new. Like, that is not, and yeah, I'm getting excited about that because for my take, if we have a disagreement, the only way we can settle that disagreement is through talks. And Hamas has said, look, we will step back if it means us moving forward on a deal. Now, the Arab League apparently came out with a, $65 billion deal. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. It was something like that, where they were talking about rebuilding Gaza and everything else. I was speaking to Lath about it. Lath was saying there's no chance that that is going to go through because that is not what Israel wants. What's your take on that? Like, give me your take on this. Do you think I'm right that behind the scenes, Trump probably does want to maintain the deal, considering he's taken this point of view of, I'm a peace candidate, I want to end wars, I don't want to start wars, et cetera, et cetera. How do you view this? How do you process this politically?
I think Donald Trump is constantly thinking about Donald Trump and how Donald Trump will be remembered, how Donald Trump will go in history, how people will look back on Donald Trump. And I think for his own selfish reasons, he wants to be remembered as a peacemaker. He wants to be remembered as somebody who improved things in the world. And that is probably motivating him to lean toward doing things that are slightly better. Now, that said, he's still got a huge amount of very bigoted pro-Israel people that he's trying to please. I mean, we saw that speech. Isn't it interesting that in his State of the Union address, he didn't say Israel once? Not once. There was not a single mention of that in his speech. Nothing. Now that I found to be like, what was going on?
Why? Why don't you think he brought up Israel in that speech?
Well, he didn't think he needed to. I mean, he thought he could just not. I mean, I expected that at any point in that speech, there would be a pro-Israel tirade, but there wasn't. And I suspect that polling probably shows that average Trump supporters don't want to hear that. I mean, a lot of the speech was stuff that people that like Trump want to hear, the military stuff and supporting the military, and the woman who had she had a basketball thrown at her head by a transgender person. And it was all stuff that your average Trump supporter wants to hear. And I just think average Trump supporter doesn't really care if you get up and say, all right, Israel, woohoo. He didn't do that. He just didn't feel a need to do that at all. There was a lot of stuff in the speech I didn't particularly care for, but there was also what I was expecting was the pro-Israel tirade. And I didn't hear that. And that again, and then we find out the next day, it's leaked, it's revealed that there is talks going on with Hamas, and then Trump's kind of embarrassed about that, and so he makes some crazy tweets, and there's more stuff about the protesters and all of that. I asked some questions here. Again, you can't judge Trump by what he says, but by what he does, and that applies to every politician, but especially Donald Trump, because he says one thing one day and one thing another. I mean, my biggest concern with Trump is the economic consequences of the Doge. Because if you get rid of so many good paying government jobs, DC is already suffering economically from the loss of federal employees. And, there is there is going to be a fallout. And I worry that, the response that Donald Trump got to his State of the Union, where, they were sitting there silently, cold shouldering him, and was it Al Green was waving his cane around. And, if there is a big economic fallout, the Democrats could ride that energy to oust him from office, which is what they want to do. They very clearly want to do. So I worry about that. He needs to make sure that the economic consequences of so many dramatic cuts in government spending, don't come back to haunt him. That is my concern there. That you can't cut your way into economic growth. And I've said that over and over and over again. You can't cut your way into economic growth. And
But this is
Doge
Republican
stuff,
orthodoxy, though. Like, in general, they want to cut Medicare, cut Social Security, cut Social Security. The reporting came out, I think it was the Wall Street Journal, that he is trying to eliminate the Department of Education, and has wrote up an executive order effectively saying, find any and every method that you can do that is legal to effectively destroy the Department of Education.
well, the Department of Education sucks. I don't disagree with them on that, but there's also a lot of thousands of employees right there who are making, six-figure salaries, a lot of them, and they'll all be unemployed and not spending money. And that'll be money taken out of the US economy. And libertarian economics is alchemy. It's wizardry. It's fake. Right? Libertarians say things all the time that anyone with that basic knowledge of economics will shake their heads. Like, they claim there would not be any monopolies if it weren't for the government. That's crazy. That's absurd. Monopolies naturally rise in the market. We have antitrust laws, et cetera, to break them apart. But this academic wizardry says, no, it's government that creates monopolies. The market is just magic, and it just magically prevents monopolies. That's not true. They'll say all kinds of things like that, and they believe it. And we've been spoon-fed this stuff, especially since the Cold War, because the enemy was communism. So, capitalism was revolutionary. Capitalism was utopia. Well, no, it's not. No one would have ever talked about communism or fascism, for that matter, if there weren't really, really big problems with the capitalist free market system, right? And you go back to the 1930s when the Great Depression hit, everybody knew that the free market liberal system had failed over and over and over again. You'd had great crises. You had all kinds of famines, and, man-made famines in India, and people all over Africa killed, and Irish, man-made land seizures and potato famines that drove people here. When they give you this body count for, communism's killed this many million people, it's like capitalism, the free trade, liberal, open international system, the British Empire, that system has killed far, far more people than any system in history, by leaps and bounds. That system, began, you talk about, capitalism came into being with what's called the primitive accumulation, which is the feudal commons that were, public property technically, but run by a lord who had control over them, and all the peasants lived there. They turned it into private property, and they started then executing people for being homeless. And as they were, creating, the free market in Britain, thousands and thousands of people were hung for being vagabonds, for being homeless. That was the crime. And then from there, what did they do? They started seizing Africa. They started seizing the United States and the Americas from the Native Americans. You had the transatlantic slave trade. The way the wealth of the world was acquired just to create the capitalist system was genocide on a massive scale. And that's why it's so ridiculous. You get this argument, socialism is theft. I've heard this before. Socialism is theft. Well, you're stealing. These people just work hard. The people who have the wealth of this world did not acquire it. The wealth of this world and the wealth to create the capitalist system was not acquired through hard work and innovation. It was acquired through massive theft, and that was just the beginning. And then how many wars have been waged to divide up the world among the colonizers? How many people have been worked to death in sweatshops? And you can go down the line. This is the most murderous system that has ever existed. So, it gets frustrating because we just don't acknowledge that, right? It's like, well, if all these people that have died because of capitalism, that just happened, right? But communism, whenever they've been in power, they killed people. And so it's like an absurd thing. I mean, you think about China had their century of humiliation when, you know, they said to the British Empire, look, we're going to protect our own industries and our own economy. So the British waged 2 opium wars against them and forced them to accept the British domination of their economy, including the importing of opium, narcotics to get people addicted. And, you know, the Chinese government estimates that roughly 100 million people died as a result of the economic devastation that China was subjected to after the opium wars. Now, is that, you know, are we going to put that in a body count? So, yeah, I mean, it's just, and we have this capitalism is utopia. Capitalism is freedom. Capitalism just means people working hard. We've never had real capitalism. If only we got the government out of the way. This is the libertarian thought. This is libertarian right-wing stuff. And it's honestly what you'll learn if you go to college and take basic economics. You'll learn this stuff, right? Now, if you get a little further up, most academic economists reject this stuff. You know, most academic economists are Keynesians, meaning that they believe it is necessary for the state to spend money in order to stabilize the economy. However, basic economics in the United States is taught with these kind of radical free market assumptions. And so people think that they have this understanding of economics when you really don't. And yeah, I just have to say that. And that's my biggest fear for Trump, is because I see they are trying to implement, you know, Ludwig von Mises, Austrian school, Chicago school economics. And I know economics. I've spent a lot of my life studying economics, and I'm telling you, that's not going to have good results.
Okay, let's dig into that. He is enacting a tariff war across the world. China, Mexico, Canada, Europe is going to be in the crosshairs at some point, where he apparently deploys a huge amount of tariffs on them also. What is he trying to accomplish? And do you think he's going to be able to do it? And because from my point of view, this is going to be chaos. In fact, there was reporting that came out talking about people are freaked out economically for what is effectively taking place. Donald Trump is going to raise prices all throughout the United States. Canada has come out effectively saying, we are not catering to this, and that they have did reciprocal tariffs with the idea that we are not backing down from this. Mexico came out. And what's wild about this too, if you remember in Trump's last administration, he did, what is it, the Mexico-US-Canada trade deal, this reorganization of NAFTA. And he comes out and said, this is a big, beautiful deal. Everything is great. And now he comes back in office and it's like, I want to now renegotiate a deal that I negotiated a few years ago. Give me your take on this. What is he trying to accomplish? And is he going to be able to accomplish?
Well, the tariffs are an interesting game that he's playing there. I mean, obviously, this is art of the deal. It's, you know, he proposes the most outrageous thing ever, and then they sit down and negotiate what they're actually going to do. A lot of what Trump is doing with tariffs is not good, but I do actually see a strand of hope, which is that Donald Trump seems to be going out of his way to inflame not China and Russia, but the NATO countries, Britain, Canada, France, Germany, countries like that. And that is very interesting. Meanwhile, he's very willing to negotiate and sit down with Russia. And it seems like even some of the statements he's made about China with the tariffs, I saw one statement he made where he said, well, you know, I would be willing to drop this tariff on China if they opened some car manufacturing plants in the United States. Did you hear him say that? Now, that's interesting. China opening car manufacturing plants in America would be great, right? That would be awesome. China is the world's biggest producer of new energy vehicles or electric cars, the world's largest car market. Imagine if cars that Chinese people, as they're rising up from poverty and, you know, getting cars for the first time in their family's history, imagine some of those cars were manufactured in Minnesota or Wyoming or Idaho, or that would be great for America. You know, so, and I heard that, and it's like, it's almost like, you know, he's playing a tough game. Like, I'm going to make China do this, but it's almost like he wants the USA to get more involved with China's economy just on his terms, right? He wants to kind of dictate to some degree how they do it. And he's using the threat of tariffs to make that happen. So I really like the idea of the USA getting less involved with the NATO countries and with the European, Western European collective West economy. And I also really like the idea of the USA becoming more integrated into the rising new economy in the BRICS countries. And every so often, Trump, with his actions, drops a hint that he also agrees with that. And that gives me a reason to be hopeful. So there you go. Yeah.
See, I got the sense that with the tariffs, he was trying to bring jobs back to America. That the tariffs were this kind of threat of, hey, if you open up factories here, these tariffs won't necessarily come into play. Or, we want to bring those jobs back into the United States. And tariffs is the threat that we're using effectively to compel either China or some of the other countries to open those plants in America, especially since many of those places are American companies anyway. Like many of the companies that are in China that are shipping those things back into America are American companies. And
well,
so
tariffs, when it really gets down to it, you're just taking care of American businesses, right? You're giving them an advantage. That's really all that you're doing. And they say, well, it creates jobs, or it creates American jobs. To some degree or other, it might do that. But the biggest jobs killer is not, free trade. It's not offshoring. The biggest jobs killer is technology. Right. The biggest jobs killer is artificial intelligence and the technological leaps that are going on right now. Even if we were still manufacturing the same amount of steel in the United States that we were in the 1950s, we would employ about 1% of the number of workers that are involved in the process of making that steel, because the process has been automated. I mean, technology has greatly advanced. In Cleveland, they have the steel yards down by the river. They've turned them into a giant Walmart and Sam's Club and all that. They call it Steel Yards Common. I used to point to that as an example of the transition to the low-wage economy. The steel yards, where people used to work in industry, has been replaced by these retail jobs that are much lower paying, no union representation, et cetera. And they have this giant place where you can go and shop at a giant Walmart, Steel Yards Common in Cleveland. That is the issue. The issue is not simply that, we're on a global market and all that, and that the protectionist rhetoric kind of misses that, right? This is the built-in problem of, technology replacing human labor power. Self-driving cars should be a great thing, but in our system, self-driving cars lead to riots in the streets and mass unemployment. And why should a great technological leap like self-driving cars cause a problem? These are problems of the irrational market system. These are not problems of we just are too globally inclined. We need more tariffs and protections.
No, I agree with you. I just don't know a way out, because you're right. I'm one of those people who think technology should be the thing that liberates, that frees us in some respects, because the issue is always who does the labor. It's like we're stuck with this kind of survival thing. And the catch becomes, okay, who is going to actually do the work? And if you have a machine to do it, okay, well, that solves an issue. The problem is that machine is typically owned by 1%, and the objective of the 1% is to make more and more cash. And we don't seem to have a government policy-wise, or even a mentality that can kind of deal with that issue. Like, for example, what happens, like most counters, when you go into stores now, automated checkout counters. Okay, so you don't need 3 people working at the counter now. You only need really 1. And if you're talking about a big grocery store, okay, you might have in the old days had 20 people working at that store. Okay, well, now you might only need 3. And then you go into self-driving cars. Okay, well, now you don't need all of these taxi drivers. So you have 100,000 people who effectively lose their jobs. Same thing with truckers. And you can go through various sections of the economy and bleed off jobs. And then the catch becomes, okay, well, if these people don't have jobs, how are they going to buy food? And do you even have a society that can accommodate the fact that hundreds of thousands of people are now not needed in the workforce? Give it 20 years. It may not necessarily be now, but in 20 years or so, yeah, automated cars are going to be a thing. Trucks that can drive all across the country by themselves are going to be a thing. Drones delivering stuff is going to be a thing. But that also means that those people no longer have jobs. And the catch becomes, how does your society accommodate all of these people no longer working because the economy doesn't need these people to work? There's no answer for that in the way that we think about work. From our point of view, if you're not working, you're lazy and you deserve to starve on the street because you're not working. That may not be true in the future. Give me your take on that. Like, do you see a way out to that? Do you see us reconciling that in any particular way going forward? Because
well, I have raised the slogan over and over again. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. And ultimately, these problems of technology replacing human labor and the frequent glut on the market and what's called the tendency of the falling rate of profit, and this is all built into the irrational market system. And ultimately, we need the state to rationally plan and control the economy to make sure we continue having growth and we don't have these irrational problems of abundance creating poverty and technological advancement creating poverty. And, we have a 4-point plan on our website mobilize to rebuild the infrastructure of the United States, hire millions of people to pave the roads and rebuild the power grid and new schools, new universities, new water treatment facilities, high-speed railway, rebuild America. That's step one. Step two is public ownership of our natural resources. The natural wealth of America should go into the public budget, right? So much wealth comes from America's soil, America's oil and natural gas and coal and timber, et cetera. But we don't get any of it. It just goes into the pockets of Wall Street corporations. Well, if the natural wealth was going into the public budget, we could take the burden of taxation off the population, and we would be getting rich off of America's natural wealth. Step three would be public control of our and the creation of a national bank. A bank that would inject credit into communities strategically as part of an overall plan to ensure growth. Right now, the way banks lend money is based on what they think will get them, profits, basically. And there are rules about discrimination, et cetera. But overall, to get a loan from a bank, the bank is thinking, am I going to make a profit from this? Well, if we had a national bank that was strategically saying, all right, we need to stimulate this sector. We need people to buy homes in this area. We need this kind of business to open. And they were assigning credit based on an overall national plan, we could rejuvenate the economy. And so the creation of a national bank. And then from there, an economic bill of rights. Roosevelt proposed an economic bill of rights, and but I'm thinking of economic bill of rights in a different way than Bernie Sanders talks about it, and the way that the left generally talks about it. When we talk about the right to a job, the right to housing, the right to education, people talk about that as a handout. Like, they say, hey, look, we give handouts to big corporations all the time. Why don't we give a handout to the people, give them some free education, give them healthcare? I don't see it that way. I see it as an investment, right? If we're going to have a strong economy, the source of all wealth is human labor, is human beings. And so if we're going to have a strong, productive economy, we need healthy people that can go out and, innovate and work hard with healthy bodies. We're going to need an educated workforce. We're going to need a lot of engineers, a lot of scientists, a lot of people that understand high-level mathematics and quantum mechanics and things like that. So we're going to need to educate our population. And we're going to need the labor power of every person to be employed. So a jobs guarantee means that, if the private sector can't hire you, we hire you to pave the bridges or rebuild the railways or clean up the community or provide some service. We hire you and utilize your labor power as a person. I view the economic bill of rights, the fourth plank of our economic program, as an investment in the population. Because human beings are the source of all wealth. So we need to invest in human beings. We don't have physical economy in the United States. We have an economy based on derivative ripoff schemes. We have an economy based on big corporations that are invested all over the globe and maximizing their profits by holding back development and keeping countries in poverty. And we need to rebuild America's economy to be based on economic growth. And the slogan that we've rallied around is we need a government of action to fight for working families. I don't know if you saw, Trump said in his speech, he said that his priority was, quote, immediate relief for working families. Now, I thought that was an interesting choice of words. I'm not saying that's necessarily because of what CPI is doing, but I did, the reason we're using the phrase working families, we didn't invent that, was because during the 1990s, the labor unions in the United States started talking about working families. That became a phrase that they used because they did polling. And polling showed that in America, the word working class doesn't really go over. People don't really like that. They think, everyone in America thinks they're middle class. They don't think they're working class. And yeah, it's weird. It's a weird psychology. And that working class, you hear working class, you think of, Marxism, you think of, for whatever reason, Americans don't like the word working class. But in the 90s, the SEIU union and the AFL-CIO realized that if you talk about working families, People
That's
like
okay.
that. That's a phrase they like. And so they started using it. And then in the 2000s, they all stopped using it because the memo got sent out that the phrase working families, I kid you not, is somehow anti-LGBT. Now, I don't know how that works because gay people
What?
have families as far as I'm concerned, and right, and gay people have fought for the right to adopt, the right to but yeah, now the woke left says you're not allowed to say working families because it's anti-LGBT. So when we formed the Center for Political Innovation, we're like, we're not playing ball with this woke left stuff. And so we came
No.
up with a slogan for what we're for. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Now, the government of action is we're getting past this neoliberal notion that the government needs to stay out. No, we want a government that is mobilizing to, provide relief, but also to build and construct. So a government of action to fight for working families. And that's a very carefully thought out slogan that we came up with. And we used the phrase working families, which when people hear about working families, they like it. That's probably why Donald Trump said it in his speech. And that was a brilliant maneuver because he was saying to the Democrats, I'm for what you used to be for. You used to be for working families. And now you're for opposing me, and you're for whatever, defending the liberal order from me. And so I thought it was kind of neat that Donald Trump said that about working families, and he used that in his speech. So it's interesting. And I hope that to some degree or other, we've helped popularize the phrase as well. So, yeah, I mean, we're in interesting times politically. I think that Trump's victory was good, and it can lead to more peace. But I have my big concerns about his economic moves and what they could lead to. So, we're just gonna have to see. But at the end of the day, we just have to build a movement. I mean, that's really what it gets down to. We have to promote anti-imperialism and pro-growth, values. We have to build a real anti-imperialist movement, and there's no shortcuts. There's no way. There's no substitute for that, right? The reason that Roosevelt was able to pass all the great reforms he did is because there was a big movement, right? The reason that the civil rights movement was able to accomplish everything that it did, and we had all the changes that we had in the 60s, that was because there was a big movement, and that there's really no substitute for going out and building a real movement right now, and that within the power structure there are big disagreements about the global system and about how to manage the economy, and we should utilize those disagreements to build the biggest movement that we can build.
Caleb, last question or last take that I want to get you on.
Sure.
There has been a change of language coming out of Washington, and one of those changes has to do in relation to the war in Ukraine. Rubio came out and said this, which again is rather shocking because up to, for the longest time, this is Russian propaganda. If you acknowledge reality for what reality is, this is Rubio acknowledging reality for what it is.
It's been very clear from the beginning that President Trump views this as a protracted, stalemated conflict. And frankly, it's a proxy war between nuclear powers, the United States helping Ukraine and Russia. And it needs to come to an end. And no one has any idea or any plan to bring it to an end. The plan of the Ukrainians up to now and their allies, Capitol Hill, and the people you talk to in other countries is, let's just keep giving them as much as they need for as long as it takes. That's not a strategy. It's been very clear from the beginning that President Trump views this as a protracted, stalemated.
Rubio is acknowledging this is a proxy war. He's acknowledging this is a proxy war. And this is something that people like me, people like you, people like who've followed this issue has pointed out. If we are giving them all of the weapons in the world, all of the money in the world, all of the intelligence in the world, if we are giving them the means to fire missiles into Russia, then by definition, it is a proxy war between the U.S. and Russia. Rubio just acknowledged it.
Yeah. Well, it's great what Rubio is saying. Again, we're hearing a lot of great stuff from the Trump administration regarding Russia.
Yeah.
But I'm still waiting for it to happen, right? It's got to happen. It ain't over till it's over. I want to see a peace deal. I want to see a ceasefire. I want to see an agreement about where the border is, a line drawn. And that's what I want to see. And, I'm optimistic. I'm smiling. I hear rumors that this might happen, that might happen. But until it happens, we got to wait because I fear that if it doesn't happen, if somehow this goes wrong, it'll be very hard to get back to this place. They'll say, look, we tried, look what we did, and so we got to make sure that this goes all the way through. That's my position.
Do you get the sense that Trump would just drop it? Like if he's pushing Ukraine, he's pushing Europe, he's pushing all of these groups, and somewhere along the way, it's like, okay, these guys are not on board. These guys are not allowing it. Where he said, okay, fair enough. I'll let it fail. I'll let Zelensky fail. I'll let the Ukrainian military fail. I'll let them figure it out on their own. Meaning either they accept the deal or Trump just lets it fall apart. That's the sense I get. But all things being equal, he would just let it fall apart. It's like, fair enough. You don't want to come to the bargaining table. You need to lose in order to come to some kind of agreement. Meaning he's going to get the agreement. Either he's going to get the agreement with the Ukrainian military still standing or with them laying on their backs.
Well, I think if Donald Trump was afraid of being accused of being too friendly to Putin or pandering too hard to Russia, he wouldn't be doing the things he's doing right now.
Agreed.
And you know, I don't think that Donald Trump is faking out Russia, because he's really gone all in on this. This isn't just a mild statement. These are really serious moves that are happening. So I hope that they can be successfully finished off. Donald Trump's efforts to make peace with North Korea were intentionally sabotaged from within by Mike Pompeo and by John Bolton. And Mike Pompeo and John Bolton are out, and they will have no role in this administration. And now Donald Trump is surrounded by people who didn't betray him. He kept track of who betrayed him after he left office and who didn't.
Right.
So my hope is that, you know, people like Pete Hegseth, people like Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio is not talking like the Marco Rubio we all know, and that makes me think he's lost his free will.
That's what wondered people said. It was like, is Marco Rubio lost his mind? Like, this is so different, right?
Yeah, it sounds to me like he's been told basically, you do what Trump says or you're out. You know, you're out, buddy. Yeah. You know, and it looks to me like Trump really does want to make this deal with Russia. He wants to be remembered as the guy who ended the Ukraine war. And he's saying, look, I don't care what you believe. I don't care who you talk to. You know, this is what we're doing. And I hope he's successful, and I hope they're not able to stop him from doing it. And, you know, the British and the French, and they're all doing everything they can to stop him, but they don't really have the power. The main thrust behind the war is the United States, right? And that's what everybody knows. And so if the United States wants this to end, the United States can end it, right? And Germany and France can throw a fit, and they can be angry about it. But it is the U.S. maneuvering in Ukraine that brought this whole thing about. And so the USA can end it, and I hope they do.
Caleb Maupin is a writer, political analyst, teacher. Oh, I'm sorry, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. Caleb, where can people find you, just so they can look you up?
Well, my organization is the Center for Political Innovation, cpiusa.org. So there you go.
Badass. Thank you, my man. I really appreciate this, Caleb. Thank you.
Thank you.
Love it, whatever comes out of your mouth. I always pass.
Well, it's always a pleasure to come on. I enjoy these sessions. So thank you.
Thanks, man. All right. I am going to end this a bit early today because I have to move. I need to find somewhere to go. So I want to go through the chats first. As I always say, all chats will be read, providing they're not racist, sexist, or bigoted. Sir Bikes a Lot. Welcome back, Sir Bikes a Lot. I've seen the Walmart that Caleb is talking about. Have you? The steel factory Walmart. Ruby's 200. Keep up the good work, Jamal. I am trying, man. I am trying. Congrats on the 40K. Who's this? DC. Congrats on the 40K. Wish I had $40 to donate. But unfortunately, I experienced electrical fire on 213. Have you? And I've been looking for a vehicle and a new place to live. Indie media keeps me going. Thank you, DC. Thank you, man. I appreciate it. I hope you do find somewhere, and I hope you do find your vehicle. That sucks. Yeah, that sucks. We had a fire at my grandmother's house one time, and it literally burned the entire house down. Just astonishing thing to see. Good luck, man. I do, honestly. I say that earnestly. M. Spars, shout out to you, M. Spars. Thank you very much. Eric, I think this is Hoosie or House Hoos. I bet Pete Buttigieg would be willing to volunteer. What is it? Transition. If he could be president. Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Because he said transgender president. Maybe. Guys, I thank all of you. We had a fantastic show today. And we are still at over 500, which shows growing. And I appreciate all of you for allowing it to grow. We have blown through 40K, 50K is the next number. We need to find something special to do when we hit that 50K, because I appreciate it. I don't know any other way to put it. We have one more. Wanda USA super sticker. Super sticker. Thank you, Wanda. All right, I'm going to end this. When you see me again, I'm going to be in a new dwelling, a new place. At some point, I'm going to have to nail down where I'm going to be. I don't know what that is exactly going to be yet, but we'll see. But all things being equal, when I see you tomorrow, it's going to be a new spot. I will be at that spot for several weeks, and make a choice probably at the end of the month on what I want to do long term. But I want to thank all of you. You guys are fantastic. I want to thank all of you for joining me. Hit the like button, share the video, share the content. I will cut these up a bit later today. You guys have a fantastic day. Jamal Thomas Morning Show, episode 108 in the record books. Signing off. Have a good one all. Be safe.